So, hey, what's up? How's it hanging? It's been a minute, and I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot. You want to know how much I've seen? Take this whiteboard of me trying to make sense of everything, and then reverse time machine that into 186 pages of notes off of, I don't know, maybe 150 sources. I've seen a lot. But hey, guess what? So, let's get into it. We are going to talk about teen mental health and the kind of teen mental health crisis that's going on. Teen mental health is like kind of at an all-time low. Everything is doing worse. That's a lot. It's gone up. The teacher shortage, increase in Manosphere content online. Okay, things are bad. Why? And there's a lot of reasons as to why. Bigotry and racism, discriminatory and hateful and targeted legislation. Point is this is dumb. No, pick up your fucking pitchfork and torch and fucking picket and riot. I don't give a shit. Come on. Are you joking? Off. Anyway, so let's go over all the times Florida has imported that whole ocean into the sandcastle hole. What are we protecting our kids from if it's not safe for them to learn in school? Social media. Told you so, motherfuckers. There are solutions. Goddamn, shut up. Teachers do desperately need mental health help. For the issue of social media, generally agreed that there needs to be some effort made. The best way to improve student mental health is through direct student mental health things. Frankly, something needs to be done. Some of these improvements need to be implemented, or else the future is just fucked. When I was doing the video and all the researching and everything on the high school gossip accounts video, I saw a few recurring trends. So one was that teen mental health, even just from like the gossip accounts point of view, was doing really bad. Like really bad, like across the board, like really bad. Two were that high schools and institutions like colleges, whatever, weren't properly addressing at least the gossip accounts, but either weren't properly addressing it or just weren't addressing it and like weren't doing anything to fix the issue. And this trend of high schools and institutions not doing much to fix it was kind of like everywhere. There were a few exceptions that were like doing some good stuff and you would see a headline about them, and I've seen plenty of headlines about them, but for the most part, schools were kind of failing. They were like screwing it up, like big time. In the gossip accounts video, I didn't really touch too much on teen mental health as a whole, as well as school handling of it. Partially, this was because at the time, I was working on a very big project for my own high school, and I didn't want to jeopardize that by speaking ill about them or anything. The other part was that I could tell that the issue was quite big. Certainly something that wouldn't fit into like a 10-minute little section onto that already hour-and-a-half long video. And I could tell that it was something big and something that I did want to address, but needed to be a separate thing. But of course, in the few months since then, a lot has changed. A lot has changed. A lot has changed. At least for me. I think for everyone else too, probably. So, today, I am going to talk to you about it, but we are going to talk about teen mental health and the kind of teen mental health crisis that's going on at the moment. And I'm also going to kind of touch on the impacts and implications this is having on society. Of course, in terms of like mental health effects, but also like other things. Like, well, spoilers. I won't spoil. You don't want spoilers. You're just now watching the video. You just started it. You don't want it spoiled, do you? No. I am someone who has had a history with mental health stuff. But I will say the past few years, for myself, just me, have not fit the trends of, I think, the general mental health trends that are going on in adolescence. In that, for just the past few years, for just me, my mental health has been better. Now, I should say, that does not discredit anything anyone else is going through, and that's because of a lot of factors that are just going on in my life. Yeah. And also just the way I am. However, I'm myself coming from a unique angle, because I am someone who is more experienced with mental health stuff, but didn't necessarily have to suffer through a lot of the things that everyone else is currently at the moment, or at least did in the past few years. So I want to kind of shine a light on this, I guess. I don't know. I recorded this later, and I thought it was important to put in, but maybe it wasn't. Back to what I recorded earlier. So first, I'm going to talk about the state things are in. All right? This is our thesis statement. This is me breaking down. Okay, so first, I'm going to talk about the current state of things. So that's how things are currently, as well as pretty much how bad things are, like in general, for teens and their mental health, as well as some other linked things. Then I'm a this is learning some Spanish now. I'm going to talk about how we got here, everything that led up to this, what caused us to get here, everything that went wrong. And then to cap things off on a somewhat hopeful note, I'm going to analyze some steps and quotation marks around solutions, but potentially good things to help fix the rough spot we're in. And I'm also going to give some examples for some of the places that are doing it good. Hey, so just coming in for a quick note, this video was originally just going to be one big video. I realized that it would be too big, so I'm going to split it up into probably like 3 parts. So I'm talking about it here in this recording as if it's one big video, but it's not. It's going to be 3 parts. And so the second parts will be uploaded after. So I should note that this is going to be primarily about the US. Because America. I mean, I'm from America. Whatever. Also, you get it. However, this does have a lot of implications on other countries, because similar trends are happening in other countries. Especially, I think, England, British. They're having a lot of similar stuff. Like, I know some of the articles I was reading and studies and everything were from English publications or English talking about things going on. So even though this is more America-centric, it still is applicable for the whole world for the most part, I think. I don't know. You get to decide. That was good. So, to put it plainly, teen mental health is like kind of at an all-time low. I say kind of only because not a lot of, institutions and places have been studying mental health and how bad it is for like extended periods of time. But at least for the time that they have been looking at it and surveying it and whatever, we are at like pretty much an all-time low. So, there's a lot of statistics. I'm gonna read off my laptop for a lot of this. Okay. So, 73% of US parents said their child would benefit from mental health counseling. 40% of parents in America report being either extremely or very worried that their child is struggling with anxiety or depression. Now, principals, 91% of principals said that they are very or extremely concerned about student wellness. Now, this is being ranked above other challenges and concerns, and it's way above like all other ones. Administrators have also been reporting increases in time spent addressing mental health, particularly in early grade levels. About 24 governors this past year described teen mental health as a crisis during their State of the State address and proposed budgets for expanded treatment. I didn't know State of the State was a real thing, but that's a funny name. In terms of actual stats though, for like teens for mental health, in practically every metric used to monitor and like indicate how mental health is doing, the good things are at an all-time low and the bad things are at an all-time high. Even the metrics that aren't in an unfavorable place, there's normally some kind of explanation for it, which then links it to not being a good reason, like a good thing. But I should say, mental health it's a good word, or not word, it's a good phrase, but it's a bit flawed, I guess. I don't know. There's like two categories to it. There's, let's say, mental development, which is like, I don't know. It's particularly applicable for like kids, you know? Be it like in their academics, if they're falling behind, if they're acting immature, or for things like ADHD stuff. Like, that's not really, well, blah, blah. Let me start over. Hi, good to meet you. So mental health, there's like two categories to it, kind of, in this aspect, in this community. Hi, welcome to the community. There's like mental wellness, which is kind of like what we mostly know mental health as, which is like, you know, your anxieties, your depressions, your other things, whatever. But then there's also like mental development health. And so mental development health is more of like, it's particularly important in talking about mental health for like kids and youngins, because it's like they're often frequently tied, both categories. But you know, like if a kid's acting like immature, not like a stop being immature kind of way, but like a, oh, this kid's like developmentally delayed kind of way. I have to reshoot some of this in editing. So it's important to understand that those are the two categories of like mental health issues, at least right now. Yeah. So first, the mental development kind of stuff. So the general trend being seen is that children have fallen behind in terms of maturity over the past few years. They're acting younger than their age. This is being shown in academic performance, like modern students are just performing worse academically compared to previous year's test scores, you know, for like the same assessments. But this is also being shown in behavior. Kids are just like acting more immature. So this can be starting more fights. It can be being more of a problem or being disruptive in class. So like leaving class, chattering, looking unfocused, not following the rules. It can be largely social. So like kids have not really properly developed the social skills they would have at their age. So in a survey of teachers, 70% said that their pupils' behavior in class had declined. 69% noticed increases in inattention and daydreaming, and 84% agreed children's attention span was shorter than ever. I should note, ADHD like kind of falls into this like mental development kind of stuff, but the diagnosis rates for ADHD have not really increased between 2011 and 2016 to 19. I say 2016 to 19 because a lot of stats are like from like a group of years rather than 1 year, which is kind of inconvenient, but like whatever, you have to get used to it. Anyway, there has been an increase in ADHD. That's not to say that 2019 was 4 years ago. Things can surely change, but besides ADHD, or even including ADHD, because like I said, 4 years ago, who knows? Kids nowadays are just presenting as being like 2 to 3 years less mature than millennials were at their age, the kids' age. But it's also like mental health wellness issues are taking root in kids earlier. In terms of the actual mental health wellness kind of stuff, everything is doing worse. Like everything, except for like the few that are not, but even those can be linked to like other issues. Everything is just doing worse. 39% of high schoolers said their mental health was not good most of the time or always during the pandemic, with just under 50% of girls saying so. 29% of high schoolers have experienced poor mental health during the past 30 days. An estimated 49.5% of adolescents have had a mental health disorder at some point in their lives. These are just like the general trends. I have even more, but just looking at these, it's like over a third of high schoolers said their mental health was not good always or most of the time during the pandemic, aka like 3 years. Anyway, that's about 50% of girls. It's just under 50%. I think it was like, that's like 1 in 2 girls are suffering through bad mental health. And then also estimated like 1/2 of adolescents have had a mental health disorder at some point in their lives. That is crazy. That's crazy. Depression is one of the worst trends right now. In 2016 to 2019, 2.7 million children between the ages of 3 to 17 battled depression, and the amount has only gone up since. That's 2.7 million. That's a lot of million. For example, of how depression is only increasing since 2016 to 2019, the rates of teens and young adults with signs of clinical depression more than doubled from 2011 to 2021. Now, the actual rates kind of depends. There's a few different factors. There's a lot of good surveys out there, but like they're taken at different times. I don't know. So, hi. So it's much later on, and I'm in the midst of editing and everything. The stats I read out were like, I have no clue where I got them from while I was putting in sources and everything. I mean, I got them from somewhere. But it's like, so in 2021, it was like depression in teens was about 42%. In 2022, the number went down. It was down to, well, Harvard did a study in 2022, and it was down to 15%. And you may think, wow, that's a big difference. Why is there such a big difference? Well, it's because, I mean, realistically speaking, it was the 2021 stuff was like mid-year, like mid peaks of COVID and stuff. So, you know, like probably like right before the Delta wave, I think, probably around there-ish, you know, versus the Harvard one, it was like more as things have settled down. So it makes sense why it's lower, but that's still kind of quite high, of course, obviously. 58%, more than half of LGBTQ plus youth reported experiencing symptoms of depression, and that is nearly 2/3 of transgender and non-binary adolescents. Related to this, you know, these are like similar things. 44% of high schoolers said that at some point during the past year, they felt sad or hopeless every day for 2+ weeks in a row, so much that they stopped doing some usual activities. Just to restate that stat I said at the beginning of the sentence, 44% of high schoolers, almost half, said that at some point during the past year, they felt so sad every day for 2+ weeks in a row that they've stopped doing some usual activities. That is 57% of girls and 76% of LGB high schoolers. Say LGB because this is from a different survey and it does things kind of differently, and that's what they said, and I'm just repeating the data. 42% of high schoolers experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness in 2021. 42%. In 2011, that was 28%. In 2017, that was 31%. In 2019, that was 37%. That's a lot. It's gone up. That's also, again, 57% of girls. So in a study of 8th, 10th, and 12th graders this year, 49.5% said they agree with the statement, I can't do anything right. 44.2% said they agree with the statement, my life is not useful. And then 48.9% said they agree with the statement, I do not enjoy life. Again, nearly half of 8th, 10th, and 12th graders this year. These stats were previously reported as being mostly stable until 2012-ish. Then also, 36% of teens reported little or no purpose or meaning in life, which is of course strongly correlated with depression and anxiety. In Florida alone, 191,000 children have major depressive disorder. That's just depression. There's also anxiety. God, my feet hurt. Ugh. So in 2016 and 2019, there was 5.8 million children that had anxiety. And like depression, it's only increased since 2016 to 2019. So actual anxiety rates, again, similar to the depression, kind of vary. So it's Harvard says 18%, or it's a third. I don't know. There's a lot of stats, and the kind of frustrating thing is that all these stats are true, but it then makes it hard to make generalizations about which ones are the most representative of the US. But, so, anxiety rates are between like 18% to 52% of teens. So, between like 18 to 52% of teens have anxiety. That is 73% of LGBTQ plus youth. I should say, having anxiety, it's not like I mean having the noun anxiety, not like the verb having anxiety or the feeling of it, like the noun, I think. Like that's like the rates of like having the disorder. But then also, trigger warning, self-harm has also increased a lot. In 2021, 22% of high schoolers reported seriously considering suicide. For comparison, it was 16% in 2011, 17% in 2017, and 19% in 2019. In the 2021, this was 30% of girls, and it was 45% of LGBTQ teens. Then 18% of high schoolers made a suicide plan. This is 24% of girls. So 1 in 4 high school girls made a suicide plan. This is also 37% of LGBTQ teens. And then 10% attempted suicide. So this may seem like small percentages, only 10%. But remember, in 2019, there was 15.3 million students nationwide enrolled in high school. So that means 1.5 million high schoolers attempted to commit suicide, and 3.4 million high schoolers who seriously considered suicide. Those are not small numbers. About 1 in 7 college students said that they had suicidal ideation. Since 2016, every year, suicide has been the second leading cause of death for 10 to 24-year-olds. Now, it should be noted, this is except 2020, when it was the third leading cause of death. The number did increase a lot in 2020, but it increased less than the amount of homicides. There's also been a sharp uptick in eating disorders. From 2018 to mid-2022, health visits related to eating disorders in people younger than 17 increased by 107.4%, meaning it doubled. More than doubled. Anorexia nervosa, which is the highest death rate of any mental illness, jumped 129.6%. Eating disorder care is significantly harder to access right now because of the increase in volume, and that's where we're stuck. For these teens to recover, they need to get into treatment as soon as possible, and we're still a long way away from having enough providers to help the number of patients we have. There's also been changes in mental health treatment going on. In 2021, 15% of children received mental health treatment. 70% of public schools nationwide reported an increase in students who have sought mental health services. Yet, only 12% of U.S. educators strongly agreed that their school was able to effectively meet the need, and only 44% moderately agreed. I should note, I have this later on in my script. So 85% of young people rely on their schools for mental health intervention and counseling. That's why it's important what the educators and principals and whoever else is saying, because they're in the environment where mental health services are needed to be provided. There have been much higher rates of emergency room/department visits in Children's Hospital for mental health. There's been a few studies about this. Depending on where you want to look, there's been an increase between 7% to 40% more child ED visits for mental health services. But not everyone is getting treated. 60% of teens with depression did not get treatment in the past year. And then there's also been big increases in the amount of time spent in emergency department, like waiting rooms and stuff. There's been a 76% increase in number of youth who spent 2+ nights in an ER before admission. And so being kept in the ER before admission is a thing called boarding. I didn't know about this, and you may think, why they got a word for it? Like, it seems like kind of a small thing. Well, if they got a word for it, it ain't a small thing. Boarding in ERs tends to, at least for mental health services, really mess with kids. There are a number of parents who have been quoted saying that its effects are essentially like having them incarcerated, and that they're just like feeling detained but unable to do anything about it. It's not great. I know that I had to go to the ED, whatever. I'm gonna say ER in this video because when talking about mental health stuff, ED has different implications. Anyway, this past fall, I had to go to the ER. It was for an illness. We didn't really know what the hell it was. It was freaking us out. I had been sick for like over a week straight of like fevers and immense back pain and stuff, and like some pain while peeing. And so we had been like talking to the doctor and stuff prior to. And the best course of action was deemed to be to go to the ER. And so we went to the ER, and I gotta say, not the most pleasant experience mentally, sitting there waiting, because you're like, what the fuck is going on? Like a real kind of uneasiness. And so for mental health issues, which are of course directly linked to your mental state, being more stressed ain't gonna help, only gonna make things worse. Anyway, that's besides the point. But outside of just like young kids, adolescents, there's also been a lot of issues in undergrad school. More than 40% of students currently enrolled in an undergraduate program have considered dropping out in the past 6 months. This is up from 34% in the first year of COVID, which you would think would be higher. Guess what? It's not. The most cited reason is emotional stress and personal mental health, far more than financial considerations or just difficulty of the program. And then also, half of young adults 18 to 24 reported anxiety and depression symptoms in 2023. A third of adults overall reported this. So I did say at the beginning, there are some mental health stats which aren't going in an unfavorable direction. And you may be thinking, well, what about those? So sure about those. So there are some stats that haven't gone up. These stats are normally indicators of mental health issues. So some of these stats are like adolescents, teens, youth are just overall not having as much sex, not having as much alcohol, and not having as much drug. Now, the reason I bring this up is that normally, there's like more stats breakdown to each of those. I'm just more generalizing, summarizing, like a reporter. Normally, those going down would be indicators of good mental health, because for teens, a lot of the time, drugs, substance use, alcohol, sex, whatever, are used as a form of escapism and like distraction. I think that's safe to say. So the main reason that people are thinking these haven't gone up, as this is skipping ahead a little bit, but is because of things like depression and, not feeling as motivated to go out or do anything, but also like phones. That you have your own little pocket form of escapism at all times. So one thing that's also related to this all, and is also going on, is the teacher shortage. The teacher shortage is a teacher shortage. Compared to 2011 to 2012 school year, more public schools in 2021 to 2022 were having difficulty or were unable to fill empty positions for teachers. More than 75% of US states are currently experiencing some form of a teacher shortage. Vacancies in England have doubled since the pandemic. A lot of this is due to stresses that teachers are going through, and issues. 60% of teachers say they experience job-related stress frequently or always. 16% of teachers said they dread going to work every day. 1 in 4 teachers in early 2021 reported experiencing symptoms of depression. Teachers were experiencing higher rates of anxiety during COVID than healthcare workers. This is a real stat. There's also a lot of burnout going on. This is, of course, in general, but also it's been rife in the teaching profession. 90% of educators reported burnout as a very serious or somewhat serious concern. 67% reported very serious. More than 4 out of 10 teachers noted that they feel burned out always or very often at work. Teachers, of course, oftentimes for the class have to, fake a demeanor of positivity and energy and everything to captivate students. And so a lot of times that results in a lot of bottling up your feelings and not being able to process things and thus burning out. There's also more than 60% of teachers say they worry about a mass shooting occurring at their school in 2018. In 2018, more than 60% of teachers said they worry about a mass shooting occurring at their schools. That's 2018. Things have only gotten worse since then. 2018, 60%. 2018, 5 years ago. You know how much worse things have gone since then? Jesus Christ. Anyway, 56% of teachers said the mental health of teachers in their school has declined over the course of the 2022-23 school year. There's also a large impact on student health from the teacher shortage. So this is also tied into a lot of the developmental issues going on from students, because their immaturity, understandably, is getting to teachers who, say, wanted third graders when they signed on for third graders, not kindergartners, for hypothetical sake. Additionally, one of the top reasons listed by teachers as a cause of their personal distress, discomfort, or burnout with the profession is the current state of student mental health, aka how bad it is. And there's also been higher than typical quit rates. Nearly half of public education employees who left this March resigned. They weren't fired, they resigned. Nearly 1/3 of educators surveyed plan to leave their position before the next school year. Public education is estimated to have lost about 7% of its total teaching population between 2019 and 2021, which is a total of 233,000 teachers that were lost. Another stat found that at least 300,000 public school teachers and staff left the field between February 2020 and May 2022. This is also partially due to and resulting in less people wanting to be teachers. The interest in the profession has declined nearly 40% since 2010. From the 2012 to 2013 school year to the 2019 to 2020 school year, the number of people completing transitional teacher preparation programs decreased by 28%. There's also a higher level of stress and turnover occurring in school leaders, like principals. 4 out of 10 secondary school principals said they expect to leave their posts within the next 3 years. 62% of early career principals said they will leave within the next 6 years. Nearly 2/3 of early career principals. Guess it's not that early in their career. So one other thing, besides all that, one other thing that's been going on has been the increase in Manosphere, Incel, Red Pill, Alpha, Sigma male content online. This is a bit harder to explain without going more into the causes of it and stuff. But if you are, I don't know, anyone that's probably watching this video, you might recognize the name Andrew Tate. And if you don't recognize him, your kids probably do. Content creators like Andrew Tate, as well as others like Aiden Ross and Sneeko and Fresh and Fit and Just Pearly Things and Jordan Peterson.
Woke moralism.
There's been a rise in content catered towards overtly masculine and toxically masculine audiences and those kind of themes. It's also, these trends aren't new per se. These trends have existed for a while. It's hard to really label this kind of content without terms that are, in my opinion, overly generalizing, because it's of course they're misogynistic. That's putting it too lightly in a way. It's like that Batman Beyond meme or whatever, or it's do you have any idea how much that narrows it down? It's hard to get terms that really grab it by the balls, the gonads. Anyway, this type of content, which has gotten increasingly more popular in the past few years and increasingly more prevalent in the past few years, also leans itself and helps fuel alt-right pipelines, especially people like Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, Aiden Ross. They all do not only oftentimes toxically masculine stuff, but also borderline conspiratorial. And then even if they're not pushing the conspiracy theories, the people who agree with them are pushing the conspiracy theories, other creators and other content creators out there. This type of content has been around for a while. Think back to 2016 when all the stuff about triggering the SJWs and did you just assume my gender and blah 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 blah, and the Ben Shapiro stuff from that time of owning the libs. This content has always been around. It's just like a hydra. Not in the necessarily grow two heads kind of way, but more change kind of way. In that, cut a head off and it'll adapt. And so now we're seeing a lot more, or a lot less upfront political stuff and more upfront misogynistic stuff. I guess. I don't know. That's just my viewpoint. But it's also, it has been, the misogynistic alpha male kind of stuff has been more popular from my perspective in the past year, 2 years, compared to like the 2016 era, in my opinion. Been more popular, been more prevalent. It's kind of, I'm jumping around a bit. Like, I went to high school. I heard people talking about Andrew Tate. I didn't normally hear people talking about content creators. It's like, when did I, in my high school career, hear like dude bros talking about content creators, getting all up close and personal with the camera? When did I hear it? Not really that much. It's like, I'm trying to think. Andrew Tate, and when Chris from Mr. Beast came out as trans. That's like about it. And considering they were talking about Andrew Tate, you can probably make a guess about how they felt about Chris from Mr. Beast, Chris Tyson. Anyway, that's besides the point. Manosphere kind of stuff is both a cause and effect. It's both a cause and effect. And so thinking about it as a cause, it is a cause for mental health issues. Just not for men, for like women and minorities and marginalized groups. Because Manosphere, red pill, alt-right kind of stuff breeds bigots and misogynists and pieces of shit. It breeds pieces of shit. In the UK and Australia, there's been upticks in sexual harassments occurring in schools that can be attributed or have been attributed to Andrew Tate. I think also if you're a teacher or someone who works with teenagers or a teenager, you can probably agree with me that like you've heard about the rise of Andrew Tate, or at least seen it, especially in the latter half of 2022. But then also like misogynists become more hateful over time, and more hateful and more conspiratorial over time, and that leads them to become bigots and domestic terrorists. I think this has been well documented. And of course, those are bad for mental health. I'll explain this more in a bit, but it's kind of self-explanatory. Of course, having people treat you like shit doesn't make you feel better. What is less talked about, though, is that the rise of manosphere stuff is also an effect of mental health issues. To maybe clarify, it's the ability of manosphere-type content to become popular and prevalent is an effect of mental health issues. This is more theorized and discussed than anything. I don't know how many like foolproof studies or surveys or whatever, and I'll put in some clips here of like people smarter than me talking about it, but I think there is a trend of manosphere creators, influencers, promoting a lot of bad stuff, sure, but then like a bit of good stuff.
Like, okay, like alpha male internet. I think alpha male internet dumb as bricks, right?
For the record, I don't think that they're dumb as bricks. I don't, I think they're wrong about a lot of things, but I don't think that they're dumb. I mean, I think they're wrong about a lot of things, but I think part of the problem is that they're right about a lot of things, but the way that they behave makes it very hard to acknowledge that there's a portion of stuff that's right.
Yeah. I mean, that's the Andrew Tate. I've been talking about that because he'll drop a truth bomb every now and again and people freak out about it. And then he'll just say a bunch of dumb shit.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like this TikTok stoicism stuff where there's something that you want to aspire to. But I think the fact that this sort of alpha mentality is growing within men speaks to a serious problem that men have, and the alphas are the only ones that are actually acknowledging it. Yeah, because I think a lot of people, I don't know about like Ben Shapiro, I think he's a little bit more political, but a lot of people find Jordan Peterson's advice and methodologies and stuff to be like absolutely transformative in terms of improving their life. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not too familiar, like, as he's moved away from psychology, I've seen or consumed less of his stuff. But I remember being in residency and I watched his lectures on personality, which I thought were brilliant. Mm-hmm. So I was struggling to understand like personality development because we don't really get a whole lot of it in psychiatry. Like, we're focused on illness and diagnoses, but like, how does a human being develop? And I watched the whole thing because he kind of takes like, does one lecture on, okay, this perspective says this perspective says this perspective says this. I thought it was really great.
And it's that good stuff that people come in and get hooked on. And then they see that it works, and then that makes them more willing to put up with the rest of the bullshit. And this is because boys and men who flock to Manosphere kind of stuff tend to be more discontent and unhappy with the current situation they're in their life, the circumstances and environment they're in, and the status of their life. And you may think, oh no, they feel bad. How do I phrase this? Culture, pop culture, media has in recent years put more effort into calling out and making it clear the amounts of privilege that men, white men, go through. And that's not a bad thing. To be clear, that is a good thing because there is a lot of privilege. But it does end up sometimes invalidating the genuine thoughts of unhappiness that young boys and men face. Using my hands a lot. It's a thing of like, in return though, because they feel their feelings invalidated by a lot of media and culture and pop culture and whatever, they end up turning to other places for like self-help stuff, especially like men's self-help stuff.
But what's really interesting, if you look at kind of alphas, is that the one thing I've noticed about that whole crowd is they're the only ones that acknowledge that men have a life that's difficult. So they say like, yeah, like if you're a beta, your life is hard, here's how to fix it. But they're the only ones out there that are saying, actually, it's like, your life is hard. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to make something of yourself? Because it's tough now in your POS. I can show you the way. But it's really interesting because they're the only crowd that I've heard that really validates men's experiences. You're basically like responsible for your own happiness and to try to cultivate that very intentionally, and that some of the living up to societal norms will not necessarily make you happy. That especially as a man, like if you are sort of like a robotic provider, that you can get taken advantage of. So I think that there's a lot of like, experience that people have with a lot of that stuff where they sort of advocate for people to take care of themselves and things like that. I think the real challenging thing is that there's a lot of toxicity associated with it, which I don't think needs to be there, which I think is what your question is like, what's the good stuff? I think some amount of individual responsibility. I think the reason that you see alpha males crop up over and over and over again, despite the fact that a lot of them will get canceled, is because no one is addressing the need. So you can chop down one, you can cancel one, but someone else is going to crop up.
As a result, they'll often turn to things that make them feel better. Now, this is sometimes like self-care, and this is sometimes like hedonism, but then it's also times where it's too much of that, like an unshackled, unrestrained amount, so much so that you're putting your care above all others. Yeah, it's like, I've done this myself. Not this. Hold on. Let me correct that. You turn to this stuff for your own self-improvement, for your own trying to feel better about yourself, but it feeds you more and more and more, so much so that you go too far. And you may think, well, it's kind of easy, right? To not? No. Kind of. Oops, sorry. I bumped you. Ugh. This is a book I got like a year or two ago. It's called Always Say Hi, The Introvert's Guide to Overcoming Rejection. This book is good. But what I noticed near the end is it started talking about a one Peterson Jordan B, aka Jordan Peterson, aka the guy who had that weird dream about his grandma and her pubes in a river or something, aka What Would We Do Without Men, Jordan Peterson.
What rules, you sons of bitches?
This is a pretty decent self-help book. I at least liked it a lot. There were some like kind of weird religious elements that I didn't love, but yeah. And so it's like one thing that gets a lot of people hooked for Jordan Peterson is he brands himself as like a psychologist, which I don't know if is totally true or not. I'm not to say, but I know that a lot of stuff that he would talk about is like basic self-help things, like making your bed each day, which I don't do, but whatever. Like he would teach a lot of basic self-help principles, and that is useful for a lot of people. But then he also on the side promotes like big oil, and that's less useful. Anyway, there's these pipelines. You learn to help yourself, but then you keep helping yourself. And then at the same time, you learn how to help yourself while putting others down. And that's not good, obviously. Anyway, what I've been saying is mostly just theoretical. But looking at the data and trends and everything, it gives my theories and ramblings more credence. In particular, data about male depression. So male depression is often different than female depression, which has kind of become like the overall universal idea of depression because it's more common. Girls tend to internalize their feelings. I'm just saying what this thing said, but it's a reputable thing, in that they cry. To me, that doesn't seem like internalizing, but whatever. That's the example the Science Journal I read said. Boys, on the other hand, are more likely to externalize their depression. This is like acting out, becoming irritated, lashing out, engaging in risky, impulsive, or even violent acts. One way this is demonstrated is through crime rates. It's been found that people with depression are 3 times more likely to commit violent crimes. Now, this link between violent crimes and depression is present in both men and women. But keep in mind, oh, my light went out. So that trend between violent crimes and depression is present in both men and women. However, keep in mind, there's of course undiagnosed depression. And because depression in men is different than depression in women, it's not as universally known how to diagnose. So that can lead to higher rates of undiagnosed depression, and therefore could be a cause of whatever. You get the point. I didn't come up with that conclusion in the Science Journal. Blame them, not me, if that's like too conspiratorial for you. Men commit most of the crimes. Whatever. Anyway, in studies, high scores on scales measuring conformity to Western masculine norms, which is like emotional control, self-reliance, power over women, were linked with poor mental health. So depression and reduced likelihood of seeking help. Gender norms are also more likely to become entrenched in the teen years, hence why teens are often drawn more to these red pill, like Manosphere influencers. It's also something to consider that women tend to have higher rates of attempted suicide, but men have higher rates of death by suicide. Men will lend more towards the impulsivity when depressed, while I've seen it theorized, women will sometimes do it more as a cry for help. Some people's theories, not necessarily saying the ideas are my own. It's also like I saw something that's like male suicide rates were like 4x that of female suicide rates, which is a lot. Anyway, as a result, different screening tools are sometimes required. So there's the male depression risk scale. This focuses on emotional suppression, anger and aggression, drug and alcohol use, somatic symptoms such as concerns about sleep and sex, and risk-taking. That's another way to find male depression in the ways that it externalizes versus internalizes. And there's also the DSM, which is like the psychology Bible, which do I have easily accessible? Not really. Oh, there it is. Anyway, the DSM-5, which is like the psychology Bible. Let me see if I can find it. If I can find it, I'll record it and put it in later. but it's in the most recent ones have been updated to include things about like male-specific depression symptoms because it's important that it's displayed differently. The point being, this is a trend, and it is both causing mental health issues because it's creating bigots and misogynists and pieces of shit, but it's also being created by insecurity and uncomfortability and distress in men that is going untreated and unfixed. Okay, so it's day 2 of recording this. I had to end yesterday because I recorded for an hour and a half, but also I was running out of space on my SD card, on my camera. So I had to end yesterday, but I threw a lot of information at you. So let's pause, take a little breather, and have a little intermission, okay? I got some of these like chessmen cookies that you probably got when you were a kid, because you were like, oh, that's neat. They're like chess pieces and whatever, but they don't actually taste that good. They're just like kind of good. So the point that I want to get at is that I threw a lot of information at you, yeah, but there's a lot more. And I'm probably going to edit down a lot of what I just said. So when I say that there's a lot of metrics that measure teen mental health, and pretty much all of them are going in the bad direction, it becomes clear as to why. Like, all signs are pointing to bad. And it's a lot. There's a lot going on. But I think it's important to point out everything so that we more know what we're dealing with. So, with all that being said, you're probably, or I would think, wondering, okay, things are bad. Why? Well, that's fair. And there's a lot of reasons as to why. I mean, think about it yourself. Your mental health probably hasn't been as good since COVID and in recent years. But is there one single factor? No. It's a lot of things. And sure, there's probably a good deal of personal life stuff, but there's also a lot of big picture things that are going on and causing a lot of mental health issues and causing a lot of the problems that I just laid out. So, I feel a little gassy. Okay, so the easiest one to draw connections to is the teacher shortage. Why is there a teacher shortage? Well, the teacher shortage is pretty much because teachers are kind of going through it. They're dealing with a lot and they're not getting enough back. And it's like well-known problems, like pay, benefits, all that kind of stuff. In England, there's been below inflation pay raises over the past decade, which have meant that teacher earnings have fallen by 13% in reality since 2010? Yeah, 2010. You know, this is a known thing. Teachers don't get paid a lot. And there's also been recently a growth of charter schools. And charter schools, whatever, I don't know, they're charter schools. But they tend to strong-arm teachers more into taking worse pay. So teacher pay is not great. Then, of course, there's been funding deficits in teaching. You, of course, know the stories of teachers talking about how they're not getting enough funding for their programs or for their classes or class resources or whatever. But teachers are also feeling a lot more disrespected by, like, people in general, but also, like, parents and students. And now the student part checks out because, as mentioned previously, there's the developmental issues. And so those are causing kids to misbehave more, and that can easily be seen as disrespectful. But currently, 45% of teachers said that they did not feel respected or seen as professionals by the general public. And then also, the pandemic and COVID, it exacerbated a lot of issues that were already going on in the teaching profession and tended to stress people out more. More than half of U.S. educators say they were more likely to retire early because of COVID. I know that personally. I had a teacher my freshman year who was amazing, a great teacher. Everyone liked this teacher. COVID hit for us like halfway through freshman year. Sophomore year, the first day, he quit, I think. It was like the first day. It was like one of the first few days. Anyway, he quit. He's this amazing teacher, but it was just like the mixture of having to do online as well as in person was just like too much for him. And so he just quit. And it was like, this was a teacher who everyone liked and was also like so much fueled by students and by teaching and everything that it was almost shocking. It was like, holy shit. Then there's a lot of natural safety concerns from teachers because of things of like, you know, as I said previously about like more fights from students misbehaving more, but also things of like more shootings, because those are also going on, and those aren't great either. There's also teachers unions. They're losing a lot of power, and I don't know, recent legislation, like I know for Florida, I think teachers are like outlawed from striking because of some old contract deal. And then there's also something to be said about how the teacher shortage is a result of a lot more creation of new positions rather than empty old ones. But that's only part of it. That's not the whole thing, of course, as I pointed out previously about teachers quitting more and feeling worse in general. But additionally, there's also an increased amount of public pressure and scrutiny being put on teachers and education, like in like news and stuff, like for a lot of like don't say gay stuff or book bans or whatever, which I'm gonna get into more. That puts teachers in the crosshairs, and it can result in disciplinary action like revoking their teaching license, which is a big deal. As I did briefly also touch on in the teacher shortage section, teen mental health is also having an impact on teachers. More than half of teachers say the current state of students' mental health is stressing educators' capacity to manage classrooms. This is not my script, is it? It's also their immaturity is tiring, as I said. And then their teachers are also not equipped with the resources or the support or the know-how as to how to help students going through mental health crises. Jumping ahead a bit, the teacher mental health is also bad for student mental health, because teachers who are dealing with burnout and stress and everything tend to teach worse. Like teachers with depression are less likely to do whole class instruction or have fewer like warm and responsive interactions with students. They tend to spend less time organizing their lessons ahead of time. 41% of teachers said they feel like they're less effective at their job when stressed. That's understandable. Are you better at your job when you're stressed out? Probably not. And so that in turn is making it worse for kids. But that's the teacher shortage. Teenager mental health, on the other hand, does share a lot of the same root causes, but it also has its own unique ones. So some small causes as to why teens are suffering. Pop culture and media, and, I don't know, discourse has in recent years focused more on like self-care and mental wellness and everything, which is a good thing, but it also leads to sometimes like too much introspection where teens are not going out enough or like doing outwards things enough. And what that results in is they have a harder time feeling attached to some things and finding meaning through that. Then there's also been decreasing rates of religion in youth. I think like religious belief, not like religious culture. Like I'm Jewish, but I'm like agnostic, but I'm still like Jewish culturally. And so I think there's declining rates of like that religion side of it. Anyway, to the big causes. One of the main ones is COVID, because it's COVID. So COVID by itself, an estimated 214,000 children lost a parent or caregiver to COVID. And then also because of how COVID was, you couldn't do a lot of in-person things. And so this meant not as much like funerals or, I don't know, like those kinds of things. And so that then made it hard for some people to grieve, and they're still holding on to a lot of that. And that's hurting mental health. Then also, 29% of US high schoolers had a parent or caregiver who lost a job during the pandemic. And then, as probably everyone knows, COVID was bad for social isolation. The social isolation of COVID, it hurt people who had weaker or less connections, or in like less established social circles. And you know, the thing is with that is that I feel like I'm saying a pseudoscience, but this is real. The social connections help us like deal with shit going on in our lives. If it's like death in the family, bad news, I don't know, tough times, stress, whatever. It's like having social connections and being socially connected and socializing Helps. That's a thing in humans. And of course in COVID, when you're isolated, can't do that as much. And so that made it harder for people and teens. To deal with a lot of the hard shit going on. Also, in general, adolescents need like social connection. That's like a thing. I think more than like the general adult human. Adolescents like need that. It's important. Also, girls in specific need that. It's important. And then a lack of it cause these higher rates of loneliness in teens. And also that's has connections to depression, yeah, but also like a lot to suicide. So of course that's not good. that's quite bad. Quite is an understatement. It's very bad. But also, in terms of like the kind of mental development sort of stuff, for a lot of people, COVID took away like 2 to 3 years of their normal lives. And when you're a kid whose brain is still all broken-o, you need time to be unbroken-o. And when you're a kid whose brain is still developing, you need time to develop. And so you take away those 2 to 3 years of COVID time, kids are then, they're like 2 to 3 years behind developmentally. And that reflects a lot of what people are seeing in the academic world, in students performing worse, behaving worse. Then also, more specifically, 56% of LGBTQ youth reported that their mental health was poor most of the time or always during the COVID pandemic. A reasoning for this can be that if you're LGBTQ+, you might be forced in a household with your parents or family or caregiver or whoever who isn't supportive and accepting of you. And then as a result of being around them and being forced around them, it's worse for your mental, obviously. There are also a lot higher rates of parental abuse during COVID. This is one thing that, while I've been doing all this researching, I've seen not really talked about that much. I think it was talked about a lot at the time when these numbers did come out like a year or so ago. But like there was a lot of parental abuse going on during COVID. 55%, so more than half of high schoolers were emotionally abused by a parent or caregiver during, I think it was like the first year of COVID. So in a previous survey from 2014, like a similar survey, this was only 15.7% of similarly aged children. Then also, 11% of high schoolers were physically abused during the first year of COVID. This was 2 times higher than the similar 2014 survey. But also, as you probably know from just being a person in society, COVID itself not only was bad in its own right, but it also like incubated and made worse a lot of other things. And so those other things were also their own causes of teen mental health issues. That's why the COVID, because it exacerbated so much, that's why I stuck it at the front, because like everything I'm gonna say was probably made worse because of COVID. Like pretty much everything. Anyway, another important factor is the mental health of parents. Depressed parents are 5 times more likely to have teens who are depressed. Now this is important to note because depressed parents may be more irritable or whatever, like some of those other symptoms of depression, like irritability, but also like less outgoing and stuff. And so they may be more critical or angry or withdrawn, and teens may then interpret that as a lot of bad things, but because of the teen. And that's not good for teens. Then, also, parents with anxiety are 3 times more likely to have a teen who has anxiety. Another important factor in all this is school connectedness and having a trusted adult. That's important. School connectedness is a sense of being cared for, support, and belonging at school. It's been found to have good impact on mental health. So therefore there hasn't been a lot of it recently. Hence why bad mental health. It's a cause. Good school connectedness decreases rates of reporting persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, rates of reporting seriously considering attempting suicide, and rates of attempting suicide or having attempted suicide. However, only 47% of youth reported feeling close to people at school during the pandemic. I'm going to read you a real quote from a teacher. Teachers are scared to make connections with students. So school connectedness is good for kids, and so it's important for kids to be able to have a connection with people at school or teachers or whatever. But that's not possible or as possible recently. For parents, most teens say that they feel comfortable talking to their parent about mental health, but 40% of teens said that they wish their parent would put in more effort to ask how they're really doing and to really listen. For LGBTQ youth, reporting high social support from their family, as well as reporting being in LGBTQ affirming schools and LGBTQ communities, corresponded to lower rates of attempting suicide. Unfortunately, fewer than 1/3 of trans and non-binary youth found their home to be gender affirming. Also, nearly 2 in 5 youth reported living in a community that is somewhat or very unaccepting of LGBTQ people. So they're not getting that much needed and much helpful connection. Speaking of, bigotry and racism are also causes of mental health issues. Understandably so. Kind of makes sense. Being badgered about just being who you are wouldn't be great. In general, the effects of bigotry and racism are getting to and impacting kids at younger ages more and more because there's more of it, of the racism and bigotry. But then also the internet and everything has made it so that it's much more known and commonly accessible and seeable. And for young kids who are just little youngins, it's understandably detrimental to them to not really understand why a person just hates them for being the way they are. 36% of students said they experienced racism before or during the COVID pandemic. The highest levels were in Asian students at 64%, as well as Black students and mixed students, both at 55%. Then also, more directly, so you're not just hearing me generalize it, children who were discriminated against based on race or ethnicity had higher rates of one or more mental health conditions. This is like 29% of kids who were discriminated against versus 18% of kids who weren't. This is a 2016-2019 study or survey, I think. But then there's also homophobia and transphobia. 73% of LGBTQ youth reported having experienced discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity at least once in their lifetime. 65% of LGBTQ youth reported experiencing discrimination based on their sexual orientation. But also, what is important is like proper representation for these marginalized groups, whether race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, whatever. Proper representation in media does help. 89% of LGBTQ teens reported that seeing LGBTQ representation in TV/movies made them feel good about being LGBTQ. I was gonna say youth, but that, whatever.
You were talking about growing up watching Disney Channel movies, and you're like, it's just so many white people.
Yeah.
And then, but you say sometimes it's not white people, and you're like, fucking thank God.
Well, it's like one of those things you don't realize that you look for diversity. And then when you see something with like an Indian person where their trait isn't just being Indian, you're like, oh shit, like this is cool. Yeah. You get excited.
I can also say, I mean, personally, I'm a cishet white guy, but I am Jewish. And so in media, seeing a character who's Jewish, it's kind of a thing of like, oh, hey, look, that's sick. It's neat. And I remember seeing that when watching the show and thinking, that's neat. That's cool. You feel more represented. And it makes you feel more like, all right, man, hell yeah. But I don't know if you've been online lately, but whenever there's more diverse representation in media, a lot of people tend to get mad. Hence this being a part of the bigotry and racism section. Also, this isn't something I'm going to get into too much. Mental health rates are higher a lot in LGBTQ plus groups. Like in pretty much all the stats that I've talked about so far, they also measure the rates of it in LGBTQ plus youth, teens, whatever it is, depending on whatever stat. And it's normally like a lot higher. So that's not great because they're not feeling properly accepted and they need more support. And so racism, yeah, but mainly bigotry, homophobia, or transphobia, or whatever, against LGBTQ plus youth is not good because it makes it worse for them, much worse, when they're already going through a hard time. Also, rates tend to be higher in all mental health stuff for not white youth. Not as high as LGBTQ plus youth, but still a lot higher because they're dealing with a lot more shit. Anyway, there's also the effects of misogyny. Now, I kind of talked about this a bit in the Manosphere section, but misogyny's bad. Surprise, surprise. Not in just institutional ways, but also on mental health ways. This is an old analysis, but an APA analysis from like a while ago of rampant sexualization from women, 15 years ago, found the following effects from rampant sexualization and like objectification of them. Negative emotions like shame, anxiety, and even self-disgust was strongly associated with higher rates of sexualization. Focusing on their bodies while comparing themselves to narrow ideals was associated with, quote, disrupted mental capacity. Disordered eating, low self-esteem, and depression were also linked to exposure to sexualized ideas. Consuming sexualizing messages was repeatedly linked to diminished sexual health, sexual stereotyping, and distorted conceptions of femininity. That study, 15 years ago, was before the internet, when a lot of misogyny and objectification was just like put on overdrive. Because pretty much always, especially as I touched on in the Gossip Accounts video about like, I had a whole section on like the sexualization of women, I forgot. But like as I touched on there, everyone's going to be present online, and just your presence is going to cause sexualization, or it's going to lead to sexualization and objectification. And it's also like exacerbating normal insecurities that kids face during their teenage years and adolescence and stuff. It's like just like picking on your brain even more. Okay, this is like pretty big update. I know I'm in the dark right now, but like just going off of this and talking about like sexualization and objectification of teenage girls, there was just a news article that came out, earlier today in the Wall Street Journal, about a New Jersey high school who had to deal with deep-faked nudes of real students that were circulating. Not to say that I was right and I predicted this, but I was right and I predicted this. But this is the world we're going into with AI and deepfakes and stuff, and so these are issues that are rampant and prevalent and going to be facing teens more and more until legislation comes along. But yeah. Anyway, speaking of structural factors, wealth inequality is also hurting a lot. 17 million U.S. children struggle with hunger, about 6 million more than before the pandemic. 3% of high schoolers lived in unstable housing during the past 30 days. Prolonged stress, like from being hungry and not having food or in unstable housing, can lead to disruptions in like emotion regulation, even in children. And so that'll really mess with them. Then also 63% of students who experience food insecurity reported experiencing persistent sadness and stress. Going back to the whole racism and bigotry stuff, there's been a lot of, in recent years, implementation and creation and enforcing and putting into effect of discriminatory and hateful and targeted legislation, like against marginalized groups. So there's been record numbers of bills being signed into law aimed at LGBTQ people in the past 3 years. Now, admittedly, most are getting overturned once it actually goes into court and a judge looks at them, but not all. Like the Don't Say Gay bill, arguably the most popular of them all, the most notable, most known. That one, there was a lawsuit against it, and the judge like threw out the lawsuit. So it's like, oh, cool. 22 states have passed laws barring trans student athletes from participating in school sports teams that align with their gender identities. To that, I show this clip of either like I don't remember who the fuck it was. Okay, so I'm going to be honest. There's one conservative commentator clip that I kind of remember, but I don't fully remember it, where essentially they end up arguing for trans people to compete with the gender that they identify with. Wow, my teeth are really blue from that Slurpee. I don't remember if... I feel like this may not be it, or maybe this was like a clippable part of it, but this is a whole like old Steven Crowder bit from 2018 in which he talks about a female to male transgender athlete who was in Texas, and he was forced to compete with women because of Texas laws on... I'm out of focus. Because of Texas laws on transgender athletes. And so because of it, well, not because of it, the kid won. He won. And so this whole, like, Steven Crowder is him, like, kind of saying, like, well, you know, why? I feel like he switches in and out of remembering that this is a transgender man competing with women because he was forced to, instead of like the normal conservative talking point of transgender women competing with women. But it's like, it's this whole thing, and Crowder at this one point, when he does remember that, oh, this is a trans man who's being forced to compete with women, he says this.
So with respect to uppercut.
And you know what? They'll try and say, well, why don't you just let him compete as a male? This person doesn't necessarily want to compete as a male. No. That's the thing. When you look at when they do have the option, they try and wiggle into, as we see, there are far more examples of female.
So this is a dumb point because Mac Baggs, who is the athlete they're talking about, has, I think, repeatedly talked about wanting to play against men, because he's a man, and so he identifies as a man. So if they're gonna find a way to wiggle out of it, then just don't let them compete and say that they're on steroids. I mean, it's just like, this is dumb. This is dumb. The point is this is dumb, and that, you know, like, just let them compete how they want to compete. Like, it's as simple as that. You're coming up with problems that you are not solving for yourself. Then there's also laws that explicitly restrict drag shows in 2 states. The 4 more states have passed similar laws, but are a bit more vague and are about like adult shows. But it's like kind of clear they're towards like drag shows, even though drag shows are like, well, I mean, one, it's a pretty easy First Amendment win of like, you can't ban those. But it's also like, who cares? It's a drag show. Who cares? I don't care. 20 states have also put into place bans or severe restrictions on gender-affirming cares for minors. Now, this is less cut and dry than, like, easy First Amendment wins, but it's still, the wins for them are rooted in hashtag facts and logic. I shouldn't fucking say that. Now, the wins for these are still likely because they're rooted in medical facts, and also a lot of things of like, I don't know, like due process, but also like parents' laws and stuff. But they're less cut and dry than a lot of like the drag shows' First Amendment violations, because like those are super cut and dry. For example, the Arkansas ban on gender-affirming care for minors violated the following. The Equal Protection Clause, it usurped the parents' rights to make well-informed medical determinations on behalf of minor children, which is implicated by substantive due process clause. I don't know what the hell that is. But it also violated the treating physicians' First Amendment rights because they just weren't allowed to talk about gender-affirming care. But then also, I think in Florida, there was a bill that was passed that blocked Medicaid from being used for gender-affirming care, and that got brought into court and it got overturned. And the reasoning for that by the judge was that it essentially ignores a lot of the risks that minors would face from not getting gender-affirming care, like suicide and depression, which are connected to not having gender-affirming care. Hormone treatment and P blockers are also used to treat non-trans children, but like they were cut out from the bill, And so then it's clear of like, oh, well, it's not equal protection. The judge said the ban of Medicaid use for trans-affirming care was done for purely political reason and was using a biased and unscientific process, which is a hell of a ruling. And then all experts, like across the board, unanimously agree that gender-affirming care for minors is good for them and their mental. Like, everyone agrees with it. Anyway, even if these bills are getting overturned, these new waves of legislation is leading to rises in the amount of hate speech and, you know, like, I'm blanking on the word, bigotry and everything online. It's corresponding because of all this culture war shit. I know that it's also like leading to kids to reevaluate where they're going to college because of the availability of like gender affirming care and like accepting communities. I have a friend who is cishet, but upon seeing the news that AP psychology was banned in Florida, was like, fuck me, I want to get out of here. And I know she was serious. And it's like, these aren't great places. Even if you're not the minority being targeted, it's still like, I don't want to be in a place that's targeting minorities. It's also led a lot of hospitals to cease providing gender-affirming care to new patients who would benefit from it. And it's also frightened a lot of families into moving or having to think about moving to places to be able to have access to gender-affirming care for their teens. If you were a parent with a teenager who was feeling, I don't know, like, I can't even imagine it, but like was feeling denied their existence every day, like there would now be this pressure and kind of need to move to somewhere where they're not feeling denied their existence every day. And that's a lot of stress for you as the parent, but also for the kid, of course. That sucks. Because if you move, you lose all your social connections, or a lot of them. Anyway, all this that's happening is really concerning and frightening to LGBTQ youth, especially trans youth. 92% of trans or non-binary youth said that they have worried about trans people being denied access to gender-affirming medical care due to state or local laws. 92%. 91% of trans and non-binary youth said that they've worried about trans people being denied access to bathrooms of their gender identity due to state or local laws. Some of the more impactful parts of these legislations are also the restrictions being put on schools, and that hurts teachers, as I mentioned previously, because it's more public scrutiny. Book bans. Book bans is a big... Book bans in U.S. public schools have increased by 28% in the first half of the 2022 to 2023 academic year. 76% of districts nationwide only banned between 1 and 19 books. This is even including temporary bans. On the other hand, there are a few districts out there who have, by themselves, banned hundreds of books. 70% of parents oppose book bannings, by the way, just to mention it. So even if the whole thing's like, well, the parents should be in charge, well, 70% of parents think that's fine. You don't need to be banning them. This school year, there have been 1,477 books banned, which affected 847 unique titles during the first half of 2022 to 2023 school year. Bans are, unsurprisingly, more popular in Republican-led states. About 30% of the bans are on books related to race or racism, or include characters of color. 26% of the bans are on books that have LGBTQ plus characters or themes. 38% of the bans are on books that discuss topics of health and well-being. 30% are on books that cover death and grief. 74% of the bans were connected to organized efforts, mainly advocacy groups, elected officials, or enacted legislation. That's nearly 3/4 of all the book bans were related to concerted efforts. Like, it wasn't like a book that was brought up of like oh, we should probably ban this, and like oh, get it done. No, it was advocacy groups and legislation and policymakers. The most influential of all these groups is Moms for Liberty, which has been connected to 58% of all the advocacy-led book bans in the country. So, what, doing the math, 58% of 74%? So let's see. Oh, so Moms for Liberty was related to 43%, well, 42.92% of all the book bans in the country. So this one advocacy group. Anyway, 31% of these organized efforts were connected to newly enacted state laws in Florida, Utah, and Missouri. Now, a lot of these laws that are passed have vague legislation in them. And the point of a lot of this vague legislation is that it means that teachers or librarians or whoever has to, because of such large consequences like having their teaching licenses revoked, they have to go through large efforts to censor things and to overly censor things, because to err on the side of caution, because it's their asses on the line, understandably so. Why they would err on the side of caution. Because if you look at like the Don't Say Gay bill, which I did a whole thing on, it's vague, because it's like it both wants to instill some intimidation, but also, make it so that's hard. Book bans will also frequently misapply labels like pornographic or indecent to justify the removal of books. But of course, when you look at it from the actual definitions of pornographic or indecent, a lot of those labels don't hold up. Most of the labels, like Mouse, the book about the mice in the Holocaust, I think there was a whole news story a while ago about that being banned in like Tennessee or Arkansas, I think, because it was labeled pornographic, because there's like and it was labeled as pornographic and taken out. What's also really malicious about a lot of the recent book bans is that they're more focused on school libraries. Previously, they would mainly be focused on like school curriculum. And so, okay, I'd be more willing to give you some leeway, because it's like, well, that's actually being taught to your kids or whatever, but it's in school libraries. It's like, that's not being forced down your kid's throat. It's just there, and you're just removing it. Why? No good reason. Of course, these books are largely beneficial for kids. Maybe not for everyone, or maybe for less people, because we have cracked out brains from being online, but books can provide to some people like a safe haven, a distraction, a way to get away, all that. And it's like, it's also good because a lot of books can provide more perspectives on things, on the world, on diversity, so that it doesn't feel as strange and unfamiliar. But it's also, for a lot of kids, it's like these books being banned isn't just a thing out of principle, it's an existential thing. Because it's like you're just being shut down from existing. It's who you are. If you're LGBTQ+, or if you're a minority or a person of color or whatever, that's who you are. It's an undeniable part of you, and it's being denied from existing. And so, of course, that also isn't great for like school connectedness, but it's also not good for your own, because then a part of you is being denied from existing, a part of your own brain, your own noggin, and that's not good for your mental. But there's also been a lot of bills recently that have forced schools to have to approve of every piece of media that teachers show. What some of this leads to is like, oh, you have to self-censor out of fear, because it's everything. It's not just books, or it's not just the way you're teaching, but it's everything. But then also, I worked at the morning news for my high school, and so I worked frequently with the librarians, because it was like all grouped together, and they were in charge of having to approve every piece of media shown by teachers. But teachers you know, it's like, it's impossible. You show a video in class, that has to get approved. You show anything in class, it has to get approved. That's like, it's like being set up to fail. Anyway, Florida in particular loves these restrictions. Or maybe DeSantis. Both, whatever. They love these restrictions. So let me go over a few. Now I want to note, when talking about teen mental health stuff, have seen a tendency of people to excuse bad behavior because of the circumstances. Like, I've talked to some people about, like, isn't it kind of weird how blah 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 does blah 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 here? And they'll be like, no, because it's Florida, and so they have to adhere to that, or like they whatever. And it's like, what's important is that we as a society, we live in a society, but we can't get adjusted to oppression or fascism. Not to break Godwin's law, I think it's Godwin's law, whatever the law is online about talking about Nazis, but to break that law, that's how you end up being a, you know, like, person in Nazi Germany who's like, yeah, whatever, the Gestapo are coming to check the house. It's like, we can't be adjusted to the shit that's going on. Or we can't say, well, whatever. If we accept oppression and fascism, then not only is it bad for, like, if we're talking about it from, like, a business point of view of, like, oh, we're bad negotiators, but it's also then we're accepting that as the new normal. And just because some people want it to be the new normal doesn't mean we should let it be the new normal, because it really fucks over some people for no good reason. Just because Florida legislation is tyrannical in some ways doesn't mean we should just be like, all right, that's the way it is. No, pick up your fucking pitchfork and torch and fucking picket and riot. I don't give a shit. Come on. Are you joking? Fuck off. God damn it. Anyway, fuck. You can't accept it, because then it's like, well, whatever. Nothing matters. Because fuck it. We're all screwed anyway. No. You gotta fucking stand up for what's goddamn right. Be a martyr once in your fucking life. Jesus Christ. Fucking hurt my toe. Got a bad toe. God damn it. Fuck. But Florida loves these. They love it. They love choking out fucking everyone and choking out any kind of, like, good thing. Florida legislation, they love it. They love it. They love it. They love saying, hey, this is an effort to fix some wrongs in history that have been done to marginalized groups. Let's just fucking kick over the goddamn sandcastle and say, fuck it. We're gonna make an upside down sandcastle. Where you were trying to build a sandcastle, we're gonna fucking import the goddamn ocean into it. Into that hole. Florida loves this. So let's go over all the times Florida has imported that whole ocean into the sandcastle hole that those innocent little kids were just trying to build. Anyway, hey, the Don't Say Gay video. Remember when I made that whole video about it? Not the Don't Say Gay video. The Don't Say Gay bill. Remember when I made that whole video about it? That thing I just tried to say? Yeah. Fucking Christ. The original bill is opposed by the plurality of Floridians. I had to Google what plurality meant when I read that. But essentially, it was opposed by the majority of Floridians. 49% of Floridians were against the passage of the law. You may think that's not the majority. Well, it was in this survey, you dumbass. Sorry, I'm really revved up. But it's like, most people were against it. It's a known bad thing. Anyway, the bill, guess what? You know how they were like, oh, well, fucking, it's just gonna be, taking the damn mic off the fucking stand. I'll is a cord flopping around. God damn it. Get off the fucking stand. Alright. Remember how they said, like, hey, we're just trying to protect the little kids. You know, this is just for, like, 4th graders. Guess what? They extended it. Now it's not for just 4th graders. It's for everyone. 'Cause fuck everyone, I guess. I don't know. The bill was recently extended. It was extended into banning teaching of students about sexual orientation and gender identity from 4th through 12th grade. Told you so, motherfuckers. It wasn't just gonna end there. God damn it. Unless gender identity is part of a reproductive class. Oh, well that fixes things, right? No, because you can opt out of the reproductive class. And it's also like a state-enforced reproductive class. And we know how Florida is as a state. So it's gonna be the worst fucking reproductive class ever imaginable. It's gonna tell you about the storks and shit, probably. ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, those guys are pretty cool normally, except for like, whatever. They said, quote, "It was never about school children. It is about erasure of LGBTQ plus people, their families, and their existence in Florida public schools." Now, of course, this is Florida. So you know what? Pretty much any legislation means that all the research and all the findings point to the opposite to be true. That LGBTQ plus inclusion in schools and like in school climates reduces bullying and depression and suicidal thoughts for youth. Remember what this video was about how those are things that are going on that are bad? Yeah, guess what? Florida's taking steps to make them worse. Wonderful. Florida has also banned gender transition in minors. Or maybe not, I don't know. God damn it. Dude, it's hard for me to follow. Imagine if I was a trans person and I was reliant on the fucking meds. And of course, these bans on gender affirming care are against the recommendation of like everyone. Like everyone. Like the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. They all came together to warn, hey, this is gonna have tragic health consequences, both mental and physical. But guess what? It's Florida, so it doesn't fucking matter. Then there's also all the restrictions on race stuff and ethnicity. And so House Bill 7, it's crazy that it was just 7, ended CRT in schools. Guess what? There was no evidence of CRT ever being in schools, but who cares? It's Florida. Then there's also the Stop Woke Act, because the woke are coming. And it's interfering with culture-based teaching. Of course, research points to that being good, to connecting lives to identities. It benefits students, of course, but it's Florida. Then there's also SEL. It's restricting SEL, social emotional learning. I'll get into this more later, but that's a good thing. The Education Commissioner of Florida instructed superintendents to stop using SEL curriculum, saying it had, quote, no place in Florida's classrooms. Hold on, I have to plug in the fucking camera. Also, by the way, SEL is like one of the most non-intrusive but best ways to teach about and help mental health. Spoilers for later in this video. But Florida, of course, says, nah, fuck it. So school districts had to silently remove SEL from their websites and curriculum. And Florida is intimidating school districts by sending out emails asking if they still use things and to check themselves and everything. Like the general consensus about those emails, I'm not coming up with this, that it's intimidation. The general consensus was, this is intimidation. And they also, when they returned the responses it was like a survey about, are you still using SEL? YN. When people responded, the education commissioner was like, you, Miami-Dade County, it seems like you're using SEL. You better fucking check yourself. And it's like, bro. Then also now, other states are considering implementing legislation to limit SEL. And of course, as I'm going to talk about later, there's hundreds of studies about how SEL is good. And it's also, SEL, barring it doesn't really stop it. It just makes it harder to actually teach. These are important lessons about, like, it's social emotional learning. It's essentially teaching you, hey, here's how to be smart and safe and wise socially and emotionally. Blocking it, it's still going to be taught. It's like the basics of life, but it just limits the resources that teachers can get on it. Then also, Florida withdrew from the CDC's Youth Risk Behavioral Survey. Now that survey has been like one of the main sources I've been using for this whole video. And of course, this is despite research and everything saying, hey, pulling out of it is a bad idea. Whatever. This also apparently puts counties at risk for losing like millions of dollars in funding for mental health services. And there's also the House Bill 1467, which brought scrutiny to school libraries for reading materials and then resulted in book bans. And of course, whatever. Students demonstrate better empathy and understanding of people with diverse backgrounds if they're reading about it. Of course, that's been found. And then there's also, Florida has banned the AP African American Studies, even though research found that 9th graders who enrolled in ethnic studies courses found increased attendance by 21% and GPAs increased by 1.4 points. And they also just banned AP Psychology and then unbanned it because they're pussies, which was kind of surprising because Florida will normally be really stubborn, but I think it's due to the weird relationship that the College Board has with Florida and that AP Psychology is a really popular course. Anyway, whatever. And there's also this, there's so much. There's also the don't say period stuff, which is like, it bans students from learning about menstruation until the 6th grade. And of course, girls can have periods before that. I think like they often do, like their first period. I don't know, I don't have periods. But from the researching I did, it seems like I don't know. It's just so dumb. And of course, research points to learning about periods when you're a girl helps you know about what the fuck is going on with your body. And also your confidence. Quote, these laws do create psychologically unsafe classrooms where kids can treat one another with less dignity, increasing risk for anxiety, depression, isolation, loneliness, self-harm, and suicide. By teaching prejudice instead of perspective taking, will students be empowered? Florida's youth deserve to learn in classrooms that promote courage and compassion, not hate and bigotry. But also, not just in Florida, across the board, this is interfering with education. More than half of educators say politics has interfered with their ability to teach. 51% of district leaders reported that political polarization around LGBTQ, CRT, and or COVID was interfering with their ability to educate students in fall 2022. And there's also been upticks in threats against educators. 31% of school leaders, reported verbal or written threats against educators about politically controversial stuff since the start of 2021-2022 school year. The threats are also more common in historically advantaged districts. And of course, all this going on is stressing teachers out more. As I said, when the penalty for a lot of this is losing your license, it's completely understandable that you'd be more stressed out. Completely. Because of all this shit going on that you can't say that's been found to be good for kids, but you just can't. You can't. There's only a few more causes. We're almost done with this. Goddamn. Ah, fuck. So another big one that's going on is increasing trends in violence. So as I said briefly earlier when talking about suicide rates, is that in 2020, it was the only year that suicide rates were the third leading cause of death. And that was because homicides had increased a lot. And so, yeah, there's increasing trends in violence. And so this manifests in a lot of different ways. 1/5 of high schoolers reported witnessing violence in their communities. There is increasing rates of sexual violence and, of course, their impacts on teens. 11% of all teens reported facing sexual violence in the past year. That's 18% of teen girls, 22% of LGBTQ youth. More than 1 in 10 girls have, quote, been forced to have sex their lifetime. I would think that's rape. It wasn't phrased that way, and these are the smart people, but I would think being forced to have sex is rape. And then there's also the effects of abuse, and so as I talked about, these are higher during COVID, but abuse can be damaging at any age, especially for kids who are looking to their parents for the warmth and support that they need. Compared to non-abused teens, the most abused teens report 3.5 times more or higher rates of sadness, 4.5 times more depression, 9 times more suicide contemplation, 24 times more suicide attempting rate. And they also reported 4 times more alcohol and drug use, 6 times more dating violence and school fights, and 12 times more weapons carrying. LGBTQ plus girls report 76% of abuse by household grown-ups. Of that abused cohort, 65% reported frequent depression, and 27% reported suicide attempts. Then there's also the growing and constant danger of firearms. Now, gun violence, so far this year, at the time of writing the script, the numbers are as follows. Total deaths from guns, not including suicide, is 11,433. I think this is just in the US this year. Total deaths from guns with suicide so far this year is 25,821. There have been so far this year 427 mass shootings and 28 mass murders. The number of children and teens killed, 1,072. Number of children and teens injured, 2,923. For children age 1 to 18 in 2021, firearms were the number 1 cause of death. Normally, in like all other years, that's been like car accidents. But no, it's now firearms. It accounted for nearly 19% of childhood deaths in 2021. Children were more likely to be killed by a gun than in a car accident. Child and teen mortality surged a lot during the COVID pandemic, but this was mostly by fatal injuries, not COVID. It was firearms accounted for nearly half of the increase in mortality in 2020. For reference, no other comparable country has firearms within the top 4 causes of mortality among children. So this is becoming especially evident in fears over school shootings. In 2022, there were more school shootings than in any year since 1999. Quote, "What are we protecting our kids from if it's not safe for them to learn in school?" Now, drills are something. They're being adopted to try to combat a lot of school shooting concerns. 95% of public school students participate in active shooter drills, and now some colleges routinely hold active shooter drills. But the effectiveness of drills is questionable. I should say, the active shooter drill industry is a part of a school safety industry, which is worth $2.7 billion. These are for-profit companies charging schools, districts thousands of dollars for their school safety programs. But again, they haven't necessarily been found to work. While I've been doing researching, I found out about some crazy shit that some school districts or companies do. Like, well, I'll say this in increasing order of craziness. And these are real, by the way. Failing to inform participants that it is in fact a drill. Failing to inform participants when the drills are over. Simulated gunfire noises in the hallways. And employing masked gunmen to, like, run around, I guess. That's fucking bananas. Are you shitting me? What? They're employing masked gunmen? What the fuck? Okay, whatever. But like I said, the drills haven't really been proven to be effective. Now, admittedly, this is partially because, statistically speaking, for research purposes only, there haven't been enough school shootings. Now, that's a good thing. Of course, we don't want more school shootings because of the relative infrequency of them. It's hard to prove, research and statistically wise, that these are effective. And so instead, they're more being found that there's not really any proof of them being effective. But there is proof of the drills being detrimental and bad to kids. Surprise, surprise. Who would have guessed that being in a situation where you're being told there's a shooter in the building, he's coming after you, watch out, he has a clown mask on, would be bad for your mental health? Color me surprised. Anyway, studies have found that in students after a drill, there is a 39 to 42% in increased levels of anxiety, stress, and depression. 42.1% increases in anxiety, 38.7% increases in depression. There is, admittedly, a boosted feeling of solidarity with your classmates. I wonder why. I wonder if it's a thing of, oh shit, we're all gonna get fucking killed. Let's team up to make sure we don't. And then there's some lingering of, oh, we were all a team. But there's also a 23% increase in physiological, health problems afterwards, with a 22% increase in concerns over death, outside of it, afterwards. Also, understandably, the drills have a big impact on teachers. Understandably, because it's well, shit, this is what you've chosen your profession to be, is this place where you're being told there's shooters in the walls, get down. So this is a quote from someone in a study. But they said how even seasoned teachers will break down at recess on the day of drills. There was a reporter who did one of the drills at, it was some Texas college campus, and it left them asking, quote, what kind of bizarro world are we living in where this is a normal, maybe even essential part of education? And that's a good point. What the fuck? Why is this a part of education? It's what that quote said that I said earlier of, what are we doing if the schools aren't safe? All right. All right. No, I can't hold it like this. And I have to not allow myself to look at myself over there. Okay. Well, shit. I think I'm just gonna unplug myself. Alright. Hey. So, it is a lot later. Everything I recorded up till now, I recorded 2 months ago. I don't think the camera is level. Everything I recorded up till now, I recorded 2 months ago. And I recorded the rest, but the way that I was holding the microphone back then, like this, caused it so that this cord would dangle a bit and would frequently have some crunching noises. And it was frequent enough that it kind of became unusable. So here we are now, 2 months later. I am now in college. I'm in my dorm. Or actually, I am hypothetically in my dorm, because realistically speaking, I'm not allowed to have a green tarp such as this up, but we're in a hypothetical world, allegedly. So, let's get into it. I'm also in Boston, so there may be a lot of city sounds that get picked up, which is just phenomenal. Anyway, so one of the other biggest causes may not be a cause. I should say one of the other biggest possible causes. Well, let me say it. Social media, right? It's something that has an impact on teen mental health, but it is currently unknown as to how much of an impact. It's just not definitive. It's something that a lot of blame is put on for teen mental health, but there hasn't been a lot of proof put to that blame necessarily. So the general scientific psychological consensus is that studies on social media's impact have been like a bit inconclusive, but there does indicate to be some negative correlation causation tendency with social media usage and teen mental health. I wrote about this a lot in my script, but there's a lot of focus put on it, but I don't know how much of it is deserved. Because it's currently, for a lot of the studies, there does seem to be a negative correlation, but it should be noted that it's hard to get a lot of data. There's been negative correlation found with screen time, but screen time isn't quite the same as social media usage. I sit and watch YouTube a lot, but that's not really engaging with social media, at least I don't think. And so it's more of something of I think if you do anything in excess, it'll be bad for your mental health. I shouldn't be holding on to that because that's going to get cropped out. Because there was a study that showed young adults who heavily use social media are 3 times as likely to suffer from depression. But anything in excess is bad, I would think. So I don't know. It's also hard to get the data because, moving trends and everything, a lot of these studies are on Facebook, but who uses Facebook anymore for teens? As well as companies don't release a lot of this data very freely because it would probably be bad for shareholders. Overall, social media can be good, but it can also be bad. This has been found to be definitive. So the good is mainly that it's a good way to connect people, obviously. So 58% of adolescents report social media helps them feel more accepted. One thing that's really good about social media is that for people in marginalized groups, like Black people or LGBTQ plus people, it provides them a way to connect with others who are going through the same difficulties and same hardships, and allows them to create connections that way, which is cool. That's cool. That's a good thing, and it helps them mentally, obviously. 67% of adolescents report social media makes them feel like they have people who can support them. 71% of adolescents feel I think because of social media, they have a place to show their creative side. 80% of adolescents feel more connected to what's going on in their lives because of social media. Then people also will theorize that social media and the internet and stuff is also why kids are having less sex and doing less drug, because it's they have dopamine at their fingertips. They have the serotonin. They have the stimuli at their fingertips. And so it's just content that they can be doing instead of more risque behavior. Now the general bad is a good bit. So there's the constant bombardment of social media. That's one thing. How you get notifications, likes, as well as how there's just everything at your fingertips all the time. There's also a lot of bad content on social media. And so, these are promoting bad things, but also providing kids with not so great things to see, stuff about self-harm or stuff about eating disorders, or trying to trick doctors away from discovering your self-harm or eating disorders, which isn't good to see. That's just a bad thing. There's also cyberbullying, of course. I mean, this is something that I touched on a lot with the Adriana Kutch stuff in the Gossip Accounts video. But it's because of social media, it's not you're not separated from your bully like you used to be back in the day, where it's okay, you go home and then you're hunky-dory and then whatever, and then of course you go back to school and it sucks, but at least you're separated for the time. No, you're still connected, which isn't cool. No, watch, I'm not going to go to bed. 64% of teens are often or sometimes exposed to hate-based content, including racism and cyberbullying. There's also just the inherent nature of social media. These are companies running them. They sell ads on social media. They're inherently made to be addictive and to keep pulling you in and be interesting and stuff. Have you using them constantly? In the same sense, it would limit your direct contact with peers and people and, you know, increases like your own comparison of like yourself to others. But this can cause low self-esteem, anxiety, and depression. Again, I am not a psychology academic, so a lot of me saying there's not a lot of trends that have been found is just me re-saying what other academics are saying about it. They're saying there haven't been a lot of trends found. But the point is there haven't been a lot of negative trends found between, you know, or like conclusive data and findings, whatever, about social media with mental health in the academic world and studies. However, in surveys among teens, they do frequently report it as not being great. Or there are like some other stats which are a bit concerning. 97% of teens are daily internet users. This is up from 92% in 2014 to 2015. 46%, so nearly half of all teens report being online almost constantly. This was 25% in 2014 to 2015. I should throw this away, or at least have it out of the camera shot. The biggest social media platform is YouTube, which 95% of teens say they've ever used the site or app. About 19% of all teens say they are almost constantly on YouTube. That's me. I'm part of that. Hi, nice to meet you. Hello. But as I was saying about like the screen time stuff, I don't know if it quite counts the same as a lot of other social medias because it's like, you know, it's speculated that you're interacting with it less. When you leave a comment, you're not necessarily expecting the person to respond and to be like, oh, how was your day? Oh, I bet you make awesome videos, you know? And most people don't post on YouTube as a social media. So it's more of like entertainment in a way. I think similar to that of like TV. Anyway, TikTok is in second place with 67% of teens saying they've used it. 16% say they use it almost constantly. Now, 36% of all teens say they spend too much time on social media. 54% of teens say that it would be hard to give up social media. This is 58% of teens 15 to 17 and 48% of teens 13 to 14. There's also a lot of concerns about what these algorithms suggest. As I talked about previously, a lot of the Manosphere stuff, but also like people with eating disorders have talked about how they've been shown stuff about eating disorders or that's like triggering to them and that's caused them to like relapse. I assume probably similar things could be said about drug addiction. Similar things could be said about self-harm. You know, the algorithms promote stuff and that stuff's not always, or not a lot of the time is going to be great. There have been multiple surveys which have found that teens, especially teen girls, report that social media makes them feel worse about their body image and self-esteem. Various surveys show between like 25% and nearly 50% of teen girls say so. There's also the Facebook papers, which were like internal documents by Facebook, I think, that found this about Instagram. That was what the whistleblower came out with a year or two ago when that whole thing was coming about. In a tech survey in 2020 about advice to future teens, 2/3 of teen respondents essentially said to just not use social media, or they warned against it, or they were like, it's not a big deal if you don't use it, don't worry about it. There have been a few studies which have found that people who use less social media or stopped using it altogether had reduced amounts of loneliness, depression, and anxiety. There was one about like the rollout of Facebook on college campuses, which found that Facebook usage decreased mental health on average by 22% of the effect of the mental impact of losing your job. I don't know if that sentence made sense, but maybe the text on screen makes it make more sense. However, there have been some other studies which suggest that the effects of social media are more dependent on the vulnerabilities of the teens using it. If they have depression and anxiety already, and if it's triggering those. And it's also been found that what mood a teen is in while using social media has a big impact on their mental health. Understandably, obviously. So again, it's kind of a thing of correlation versus causation, chicken and the egg. Again, to generalize, the most commonly agreed upon thing is that social media's impact is dependent on who is using it. A 16-year-old male from Indiana remarked, "I think that for some people, social media can have negative effects on their mental health, but for others, social media can make them feel more connected to those around them." A 16-year-old female respondent from Idaho commented, "Personally, I think social media is a good, bad thing depending on who is using it." So, The reason people are like really speculative about how bad social media is, despite how much it's been blamed in the media and by politicians and by a lot of people publicly. I have to burp. The reason it's more speculated is because science and doctors don't exactly have a great history of correctly predicting things. You know, in the 40s, psychologists were worried children were becoming addicted to radio crime dramas. Then they were concerned about like comic books, and then TV, and then like video games, and then whatever, maybe social media now. There's also like at the start of the 20th century, people were worried that kids would become addicted to reading. So it's like, y'all don't have like a perfect track record here. So if we're talking about false panic, I feel the need to bring up Jean Twenge. Jean Twenge, as well as Jonathan Haidt, but less so him, are names that have come up a lot during my researching. Twenge and Haidt are both psychology professors. Haidt is at NYU and Twenge is at San Diego. Now, the two of them very frequently, publicly, talk about the detrimental impact of social media on teens. The two of them co-own a 327-page long Google document that is entirely focused on compiling, citing, and making abstracts of articles and studies on the impact of social media on teen mental health. For some reason in particular, they're really obsessed with it happening after 2012. I don't totally know why. They haven't really given a full reason as to why specifically 2012, but 2012. So Twenge is a lot more outspoken, so I'm going to focus more on her. I'm not an academic, so I'm not going to pretend to have a fully well-nuanced, well-balanced opinion on her credibility. However, I will parrot some things that other people have said about her, because she's in a lot of stuff. She wrote she's cited in 14 of the sources that I ended up going through. I went through a lot of sources. I went through maybe close to 200-ish, and she was in 14, which is a good amount. Anyway, so Twenge is commonly criticized for kind of coming up with an idea or theory or hypothesis and then finding the evidence to fit it. In one of her books, she made the argument that millennials tend to be more narcissistic and self-centered, and her evidence for this was that she cited the increased recorded usage of the phrase "I love me" in printed books over the last decade. However, someone fact-checked her and found that the phrase "I love myself," which fits more and would make more sense, fluctuated with less satisfying results and even had a higher frequency in the 1770s than the early 2000s. So likely what is more of a grammar change is being thought of as a societal change, at least by Twenge. She said some things and staunchly defends what she said, that millennials are better off financially than they think because the median household income is higher than the previous generations at the same age. Now, I fact-checked her and looking at some other metrics and stuff, and that when accounting for inflation as well as additional financial burdens, that's not really the case. They're not better off than previous generations. She also might be a TERF. I don't totally know. She kind of gives TERF energy, but don't totally know. Anyway, she's been criticized for all this with the main point that she's jumping to conclusions, as well as kind of relying on inconclusive evidence and is creating a false panic. Twenge apparently responded to a lot of these criticisms in her newest book called Generations, which is studying a lot of the differences in generations, the generations of people. Apparently, Generations is a bit more data heavy, though from what I have read, she still does seem to be quite biased and opinionated in like a lot of the statements she says. So, either way, Twenge is just either like a prophet who the scientific community is going to be kicking themselves for doubting, or she's just a random lady creating a false panic. Time will tell, but I felt the need to carve out a section for her just based on how fucking frequently she showed up in so many of these articles. That being said about Twenge, there are a good number of credible people and organizations who have spoken out about social media, and they are saying there are negative effects to it. Like the Surgeon General recently put out an advisory about social media and teen mental health and called youth mental health the defining public health issue of our time. The American Psychological Association also issued their first ever social media guidance earlier in May. Then also 85% of teachers thought the ever-swiping nature of social media has negatively affected pupils. Still, when looking at the studies and the academics of everything, it's kind of unknown. They're saying it, sure, but they don't have a lot of proof to it, I think. The last big cause of teen mental health being bad, besides social media, is just like a general lack of hope about the future. This has been found in a lot of different sources. Students interviewed about the biggest stressors and what caused them the most anxieties it was some school district. The number one answer was lack of hope about the future. And it kind of checks out when you're also thinking about like, you know, chicken and the egg of like depression and stuff, of like, you know, depression causes hopelessness, but like hopelessness would cause depression. I don't know. It does also check out when you look at the modern state of the world. There's a ton of political polarization, nationally, but also internationally, especially internationally now. And we're kind of seeing the revving of going into a new Cold War era. There's also a lot of bigoted and discriminatory trends and legislation. There's a climate change. That's not good. And there's also the current economic climate and the future economic climate, and having to deal with a lower quality standard of living than previous generations. You know, they can't afford student debts or a home or healthcare or just so much else. It's not exactly the breeding grounds for like a great mental state. They felt unsure. That lack of confidence was really a major concern to them. They didn't feel settled in terms of what their opportunities would be as they left us. Those same students were telling us, we know we can get into a good school, but we're not sure that's going to be enough. Are we going to be all right? So that's kind of depressing, right? And you may be wondering, all right, well, shit. Are we as a society doomed to fail? No. No. Yes, no. Yes, but no. Kind of. There are a lot of solutions to everything that I addressed, but unfortunately, a lot of the more effective ones would require a lot more big societal communal changes. And the issue with that is that that's not feasible. We can't overnight change our economic market climate system thing. No solution is one size fit all. It's all combinations of things, as well as like there's no guarantees. It may work for some people, it may not work for other people. But there are solutions. There are solutions that would more directly fix things and solve a lot of stress. But they are next to impossible in modern day America, or not really worth me talking about. So these would be like gun reform, or large restructuring of the economy to eliminate a lot of wealth inequality, or, more social safety nets. It's not really something that's like, do it, However, there are a lot more actually immediately attainable solutions. First, to fix the teacher shortage. 42% of teachers said that administrators have not made any effort to relieve their stress, with only 2% saying there's nothing their school district could do. So there is room for improvement there. Pretty much all of the fixes for the teacher shortage are things that would need to be taken by administrators or policymakers. Whether this is stuff on a national level, a state level, district level, local level, whatever. It's more like legislative things, kind of, I think. The top 2 fixes for the teacher shortage and for burnout listed by teachers is pay increases and hiring more, which is kind of self-explanatory, duh, obviously. In terms of more specifically, so thinking about salaries, teachers aren't really being paid that well, as I said previously. Schools need to offer better compensation for teachers as a whole, as well as teachers who end up taking on more responsibilities. Some places are doing things like signing bonuses, I saw a lot of places that were doing signing bonuses. Also, I think Florida and DeSantis, kinda out of character in a way, we're doing some cool stuff, as they did approve a giant budget boost specifically for teacher salaries, that's cool. Doesn't excuse their other things, but it's cool. So for hiring more would, make it easier for teachers so that they're not having as much work that they're having to do themselves, as instead the school would be able to delegate more. Even things like hiring paraprofessionals, like aides, assistants, whatever, that would also help with the workload for a lot of things. Of course, hiring more would be easier if all the other issues were fixed, like pay, like more interest in the field, like tons of other stuff. But, grandfather paradox. Some examples for how some places are going about it, which is going good. Suffolk Public Schools in Virginia promised 31 high school graduating students a letter of intent to come back and teach at their public schools. Then Miami-Dade College and Public Schools in Florida launched a teaching academy at the high school in the county to encourage teens to pursue a teaching career. And through dual enrolling, high schoolers can earn college credits around education majors while still working on a high school diploma. Once they graduate, they can go to the college, and once they graduate the college, they can come back. Even if it doesn't work for teaching, it still instills values like communication, leadership, and other skills. But then there's also hiring more staff for mental health things. So after pay increases and hiring more, teachers listed improving student mental health as a good fix for their mental health. Teachers are leaving because they don't feel like the system is helping them take care of their kids. Of course, I'm going to talk more about kids in a second, so hold your horses, chill, okay? Teachers want administrators to hire more social workers or guidance counselors or school psychologists or whoever to help them in dealing with teen mental health. Because a lot of the times, a lot of the burden and a lot of the stress of trying to manage that is put solely on the teacher. In the Minneapolis teacher strike in spring 2022, which did last more than 2 weeks, they settled on a deal that doubled the number of nurses and counselors in elementary schools and provided a social worker in every school. But there's also stuff of just providing more general resources with the goal of assisting teachers in helping teen mental health. The University of Wisconsin-La Crosse created an online program for teachers who want to become school psychologists. It was made with the goal of attracting rural educators. Then there's also Classroom Wise, which is helpful to anyone who interacts with kids. It's a free, flexible online course and resource library that teaches actionable strategies, such as how to create rules and routines that make classrooms feel safe and how to model emotional self-regulation. Then there's also the San Luis Obispo County in California. They hold regular staff meetings on training on mental health matters, and they're planning on doing even more training. North Dakota requires a minimum of 8 hours of youth behavioral training every 2 years for teachers and staff, which is about a whole range of different topics. Iowa requires annual evidence-based training on identifying adverse childhood experiences and strategies to mitigate toxic stress response. Besides that, an important thing is creating a school environment which is open and caring about teacher mental health, like as its own thing. Some of this is being open just as an administrator, as it helps lessen the stigma. Teachers who feel like they have a support system at their school have better mental health, understandably. However, a lot of teacher mental health things kind of come with an asterisk, because a lot of it, self-care things, is kind of a bit administrators at schools have recently been following a lot of pop culture media trends of self-care, oh, so cool. And part of this is holding professional development sessions on self-care or meditation or breathing exercises and stuff, or emails reminding staff to take time with your families, or encouraging staff to do yoga or write in a journal. And while some studies have found that teachers who participate in these kind of self-care things do benefit from it, it's gotten a lot of pushback. I think most teachers aren't a fan, or they get turned off from it. Only 11% of teachers said programming encouraging self-care would be helpful. Some teachers see it as well-intentioned, but it's just a substitute for wider change that would be more beneficial. But some teachers just see it as insulting. The journaling thing, how it's do that on your own time, not on the clock. Or one fair criticism I saw was from a Chicago teacher who said that in her opinion it was kind of sexist, because teaching is a primarily female dominated career field, and you wouldn't tell a construction worker to go take a bubble bath to deal with stress. It's all right, fair. In reality, if administrators really are determined on helping teacher mental health, but specifically through the self-care kind of things, they should really go more full tilt on it. One of the best ways to do this is to make school counselors available to the teachers. Thrive Academy, which is a public boarding school in Louisiana, they offer teachers the option to participate in individual therapy sessions with school social workers after school. Later on, they also hired contract workers for teachers who kind of felt weird if it's well, you work for the same boss, which is fair. Anyway, the social workers, they kept all information confidential, but they would go to the administration if there was general trends about all your teachers feel riddled with anxiety whenever blah 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 blah. They also would hold weekly group therapy meetings where teachers could talk about specific student academic and social emotional needs and discuss best strategies. And this was also really helpful for administrators, as it allowed them to hear and see a lot of the feelings and concerns of teachers, so that they could more directly act on it and try to fix it. So there's also Puck charter schools in California. They offer a counseling program for students and educators. They use graduate interns studying American Family Therapy since it's cheaper. The interns get credit towards their degrees. It was originally geared towards students, but after the pandemic, they realized this would be helpful for the staff. The principal says about 20% of teachers have done the on-site counseling over the last 2 years. And not all take advantage of it, which is fine. So Puck emphasizes that teachers can change their mind at any time if they want, and they'll always be there. There's also the San Antonio Independent School District. They instituted peace areas where teachers can go to relax. There's also the Northside Independent School District in San Antonio. They also have calming spaces and relaxing stations for teachers, and they have a care clinic for teachers and staff. Also, some teachers have said that if you're gonna do these kinds of self-care sessions about meditation or yoga or whatever, that you should more fully embrace those. Get a professional, get a breathing coach or a yoga instructor to come in and actually teach it. so that it's not just you spitting out your ass. But there's also a lot of smaller things that administrators can do to improve the mental health of teachers. They can train certain teachers or staff so that they're like kind of champions for mental health at the school, and they can like, even though they're not in leadership positions, they can like speak out and be like, whatever. We're dying. We need help. They can also like make support groups. So in San Antonio, there is the San Antonio Leaders and Teachers, also called SALT. They are a nonprofit professional networking association for educators in and around the county. The mission is to elevate and celebrate teachers and learning. They get together to share stories and ideas, just like little events. And, you know, some educators say that these kind of outings really go a long way in helping them feel more connected and have more of a support system. There's also the Happy Teacher Revolution. They started in Baltimore, and they have now expanded to more than 300 schools across the world. The teachers regularly meet and like give each other advice, and encourage each other to prioritize their own well-being. The program also trains educators to serve as facilitators for schools and help their peers learn to manage their own emotions. Besides that, if you really want to be cheap, there's a lot of even easier things to do. Cutting down on the amount of like required meetings for teachers, making them like optional, like especially these like kind of self-care things, you know, like why force you to come into a meeting where we tell you how to do self-care when you could be out doing the self-care? Give teachers more time to prepare for their classes. Reducing class sizes as well would be helpful. These are all like teacher listed things, you know, that way they have less cats to corral. Waiving some like expectations and requirements during periods of high stress, just to like make things flow smoother, like testing periods and stuff, not making it so you have to hit blah 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 blah. One thing that I also saw, which would be just so easy to do, would be that like administrators should have to like combine all their emails that they would send throughout the day into like one email that's like easy to read, and they just send it once a day. That would be cool. Teachers would really like that. I know I'm at college and I get fucking 30 emails a day from the same place that I'm not even signed up for. God damn, shut up. And then also like reducing the paper workloads. That's another thing that teachers cited. Also, an important thing is like teachers joining teacher unions. If they're not like required, join them, help them, because you know, united we bargain. What is it? Yeah, united we bargain, divided we beg. I just want to make it clear that like teachers do desperately need mental health help, because without helping them, schools can't help the kids. We are not a place that cares about mental health unless we care about mental health for everybody, and that includes our adults on campus. Teaching was really hard before the pandemic, and it's only gotten exponentially more so. Teachers need places to process their feelings. Day 2 of recording. Anyway, to teens and students. Currently, schools have a lot of funding, like more than normal. Primarily because of COVID federal funding. And there were a bunch of like programs and stuff that the federal government did, as well as like a lot of state governments, which gave schools a lot more funding. And a lot of it was for things like mental health. And so schools do have a lot of the funds at the moment to be able to like fund the stuff that I'm gonna list as like would be helpful. Anyway, to kids and teens and actually fixing their mental health. One big thing that would be helpful is more properly engaging parents in the mental health of their teens. Now, this is something that surprisingly teens have cited themselves as would be helpful. So part of this is parents need to like have more close mental health conversations with their kids, and it also needs to be in ways where they're listening and not trying to problem solve all the time. As parents, we tend to lecture and they need us to listen. Give them permission to talk freely and allow them to have an open dialogue. A lot of kids are afraid parents could overreact, feel disappointed, or they are afraid to get in trouble by not allowing them to go to their friend's house or taking their phones away. I think opening up and creating a safe space in your home is really valuable because it allows everyone at home to be comfortable talking about their feelings. Also, what parents can do is they can learn more about depression and anxiety and treatment for them and when kids need treatment. That way they can better help their own kids. Another thing parents can do is that they can help their kids kind of find more meaning in life, because a lot of kids don't feel like they have a lot of meaning. So bring them in activities which are bigger than themselves, so that kids can find meaning in doing big work, charity things or volunteer work or whatever. Those kinds of things are bigger than just the individuals doing it. Also, considering how high the abuse rate was, I think a lot of parents need to take a minute and reflect to see how their behavior has been with their kid over the past few years and how appropriate it's been. Emotional abuse is something that can occur in all kinds of relationships, and it can manifest in a lot of different ways. Constantly criticizing or regularly ridiculing people, making people question their self-worth, isolating them from certain people, making accusations against them, gaslighting, belittling, or giving silent treatment. This is something that often gets normalized within families, and I think also normalized within cultures, familial culture, and that's not cool. Of course, it's bad. So, if you think that you may have been abusive as a parent, act on fixing it. Go to a professional for help. It's also important to apologize and have an open dialogue with your kids. You could say something like, I know this was a difficult couple of years for us as adults. I can't imagine what this was like for you. And I have said and done things over the past couple of years. You didn't do anything wrong. If you are someone who is going through abuse from a parent, it's important that you find a trusted adult or someone that you can talk to. It helps to not feel as isolated and to feel more safe. And also so that they can help guide you through situations when you're too stressed out to have proper judgment. For the issue of social media, even though it is something that hasn't been totally decided as to how bad it is something that has been generally agreed that there needs to be some effort made to mitigate the possible effects. So some things that parents could do are set screen time limits, especially around bedtime, because the blue light and everything. Don't give a youngin a smartphone right away. Maybe instead start with just a smartwatch or a phone without internet. I think cellular internet. Talk to teens about it all. Have an open dialogue. Make a family screen time plan taking into account which activities increase stress versus provide satisfaction. And then you also have to hold yourself as a parent accountable to the same plan if you are a parent. Yeah. For kids themselves, there's a lot of things as well that they can do to try to help their screen time stuff, social media stuff. So one thing is doing a digital audit. There's a few apps that do this, but also if you have the screen time setting enabled on your phone, that'll do it. It's just something that shows you how much you're spending time on certain apps, and that's a good first step. Another thing is adding friction to accessing these apps. So maybe deleting the Twitter app or X app from your phone so that you have to use it in the browser on your phone. Just that extra layer, so it's harder to do and therefore takes more energy to engage in these habits that maybe aren't as great. You can also reach out to your parents for help. Or other trusted adults. Another thing which is good for kids to do is go into the settings of the app and tweak the settings. Notifications, you're getting notified of it less, or I know some apps do have their own kind of screen time limiting things that are in my opinion a bit weird, but if that would be helpful to you, then do that. Then one exercise that I've seen listed is to make a pie chart of what you want your either your ideal day or your ideal things to do in a day. Make a pie chart of it and ration up how much time you spend on it, and then try to stick to that, because you'll realize, oh, social media is not actually that big. I don't really want to do it that much comparatively to other things. So then for toxic masculinity and the manosphere kind of stuff, the solution to that lies a lot in the exact way that it is responded to once warning signs are seen. According to professionals in the field, what's really important is to not push against falling into the rabbit hole, but to instead divert away from it. So one thing is to divert towards healthy masculinity or positive representation of what being a man is and stuff. Since masculinity isn't inherently toxic, and so it shouldn't be punished, just more properly treated. What's been found to be really helpful in preventing like red pilling is when a group of guys like just sit down and have like an honest and earnest heart to heart about like their feelings. This is like real. This is real. Like a place of trust to just talk to each other about what makes them sad, what stresses them out, or like other things that should be communicated but are oftentimes have societal pressures to not be communicated. This especially works well in like instances where there's people that come in who are from like career fields that are thought of as being like more masculine, so like the army or like law enforcement kind of stuff, and like having them come in and talk about their feelings and stuff. We also point out that healthy manhood is an inward thing as well as an outward thing. Men have higher rates of suicide and early death. They struggle silently with anxiety and depression. They sometimes forego basic medical care. Looking tough, being tough, those kinds of expectations harm men as well. Also, what's really important is calling out bad behavior, obviously, and like calling in good behavior and like being like, hey, this is really cool for like that like kind of very basic carrot and sticky kind of thing, I think. Going back to teens, there's also the matter of improving school connectedness and school safety. Youth who felt connected during middle or high school have fewer problems with substance use, mental health, suicidality, and risky behavior. Youth who felt connected to adults or peers reported lower rates of persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, seriously considering attempting suicide or attempting suicide, than those who didn't feel as connected. This kind of ties into like the teacher shortage stuff, as I was saying, as like what's important is like teachers need to be in a place where they can be someone who students can connect with, and so that way their mental health is better. But so for teachers, that means like they need to be able to be present. So of course the teacher shortage stuff needs to be worked out. Also, one thing that's like kind of straightforward is just like don't have hateful legislation in general, but also like in schools. Just don't have it. Just shut it down, because like that stresses out kids a lot, obviously, but it also stresses out teachers a lot, obviously. And so, you know, if teachers are stressed, then harder to connect with kids and so on, and everything. Just like shut it down. Shut it down. Why is that happening? Just shut it down. Just shut it down. Just shut it down. Part of improving school connectedness and safety is, you know, preventing violence. Gun reform. You know, don't do the shooter drills. As I showed, shooter drills are not good for kids. They have negative effects on everyone involved, you know, kids and teachers. As I didn't show, because it doesn't exist, shooter drills have shown no positive effects on safety. So there's just no benefit. There's just no benefit. If schools are stubborn on doing shooter drills, then you just have to make sure that you're doing them right in ways that are appropriate. So this is like making sure to tell participants prior to the drill that there's going to be a drill and that it is a drill. That's important. Allow parents to opt out their kids. Ensure that the drills are developmentally appropriate, so there's not people with like masks or fake gun noises going around in elementary school. Make sure that the drill content involves trauma-informed approaches to address students' well-being. And then what's also important is just like tracking the efficacy of drills so that, you know, if it's shown that they're really just really bad, to then just stop doing it. But there are practices that are better than drills that schools could be doing instead, like more proactive things. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security themselves concluded in an investigation, I think, that proactive efforts to stop school shootings are more effective than like physical improvements or drills for school safety. These kinds of proactive efforts include better access and better quality mental health professional and social support, non-punitive or less exclusionary discipline, trauma-informed emergency planning for teachers. This has been like in a ton of things actually proven to be really good. Making sure the school climate is safe and good. For the more connectedness kind of stuff, The What Works in Schools program has the CDC funding, and it's a program for districts to like make changes that have been proven through research to help school connectedness. Some of these are like adding more or bettering service learning programs, bringing in mentors from the community, or like putting in effort to like make sure the schools are more safe and welcoming to LGBTQ+ students. School connectedness is a key to addressing youth adversities at all times, especially during times of severe disruptions. Students need our support now more than ever, whether by making sure that their schools are inclusive and safe, or by providing opportunities to engage in their communities and be mentored by supportive adults. Another just like other thing is less testing would be good. Like that brings about a lot of anxiety and depression in kids, and I also think it's only gotten like mixed results in like how effective the testing is. So doing that less would be good. That'd be good. But the best way to improve student mental health is through direct student mental health things. Providing more and better resources on campus and more and better education about mental health. Some of this is like the social emotional learning. That's good. It's been a while since I recorded, so I don't remember if I talked about this in one of the previous recordings or not. But this is like education on things of like self-awareness, self-management, self-control, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness, blah, 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 blah. And also like adapting it for the age group, like for younger kids, teaching them about like self-control, but for older kids, talking about like grief and death and moving on and rejection or whatever. Healthy and unhealthy relationships, violence prevention techniques. SEL has been found to reduce emotional distress, as well as reduce behavior problems. It's also been found to help manage symptoms related to anxiety and depression. It's also been found to result in a 11% boost in test scores. There are some links to it having increased earnings later in life, but overall the investments in SEL has resulted in like a $1 in to $11 out return. I think I said that correctly. SEL's cool. Another thing is focusing more on like whole child approaches, which essentially just like treats a student as a multidimensional individual, and that schools are like big communities, and schools then are like more providing an array of physical and mental health support. Also things like promoting mental health literacy in schools, that's another good thing. Studies show programs for literacy can improve recognition, management, and prevention of mental health challenges and can decrease stigma about mental illness and treatment in school communities. Also, in general, students are just more likely to tell each other about their personal hardships than like an adult. So making sure that when they're talking to each other, they can actually help each other is important. So at Reading Memorial High School, the school teamed up with the local police department to teach kids mental health first aid. They've taught 450 plus kids how to recognize signs and symptoms and help a friend and access trusted resources. They've taught how to recognize changes in behavior, like failing to pass in assignments or refusing to socialize on weekends, and when to loop in a trusted adult. The idea is to catch kids before the struggle becomes too big and like too much of a danger, to catch it earlier on and to therefore be more proactive. Catch kids before struggle becomes a crisis. There's the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. They have created conversation cards to equip kids with basic skills for talking about suicide. There's the Mindset Matchup Club at Bishop Shanahan High School in Pennsylvania, as well as the Raise Your Voice Club at Merrill High School in Wisconsin. These are two clubs that were made by students, and they're more focused on like mental health openness and like talking about your struggles and stuff. And they've each found like a ton of success. But mainly, the best way to directly help kids through schools is to directly have more stuff to help kids in schools. 85% of young people rely on their schools for mental health intervention and counseling. 85%. A big part of this is outreach efforts and intervention in mental health issues. It's not just something of like, it's just there. It's like these programs have to be able to like jump in when there is a crisis that's going on. Students are fearful of asking for help because of the stigmas around it, but they also don't know about what's going to be kept secret and what's not. An effective public health approach to the youth mental health crisis requires equipping school communities with prevention and intervention strategies so that all students are supported and protected. So a good way to fix this is like screenings. Obviously. The U.S. Preventative Services Task Force recommends regular anxiety screenings for youth age 8 to 18 and regular depression screenings for adolescents 12 to 18. Battle High School in Columbia, Missouri has students fill out a checklist for the school to use to assess mental health. This allows them to fast track the students who may need more help. Any students that are in a zone where they could be some worry for internalizing, or they may have indicated that they're being bullied, or they don't have a support in the building or a staff member they trust, we make our best effort and do everything we can to reach out to those students. There's also New Jersey. They created $1 million in mental health screenings in schools grant program that helps provide funds for schools to administer annual depression screenings for students grades 7 to 12. Another big thing is to just hire way more professionals, like way more. High schools are recommended to have school guidance counselors, school social workers, and school psychologists. Each of these is different, okay? The American School Counselor Association recommends a ratio of 1 school counselor to 250 students. The National Association of Social Workers recommends a ratio of 1 social worker to 250 students, but then in intensive needs students, 1 to 50. And then the National Association of School Psychologists recommends a ratio of 1 psychologist to 500 students. In reality, though, only 2 states in the US meet the student to counselor ratio. Only 14% of school districts meet the ideal ratio. No states meet the student to social worker ratio. Only 2 states, one being DC, met the student to psychologist ratio. Only 8% of districts meet the student to psychologist ratio. More than 5.4 million public school students attended districts with no psychologists. That's crazy. In West Ottawa, Michigan, the district hired 10 additional mental wellness coaches with property taxes and used pandemic relief funds to hire 16 additional interventionists. A lot of this, it should be noted, won't come at that big of a cost. After 1 year of the community fighting for it, the school board of Killingly High School in Connecticut recently approved a mental health clinic for the school that came at no cost to the district. No cost. However, students were rallying for it to be improved even more because the clinic wasn't what they wanted. It was only open 3 days a week, and more importantly, it required parent consent for treatment, which isn't great because of all the stigma stuff. And they're justified in being mad about it, obviously. To think that we have to beg and plead to be heard is, to put it plainly, unbelievable. However, I believe if we yell loud enough, they will hear us. In Wamsville, the Madison County Board of Supervisors recently talked about their efforts to improve mental health by getting social workers to go to school districts in the county. The results were, unsurprisingly, great, with lots of social workers seeing many students for many sessions. But Madison County Mental Health has it work by getting insurance info from parents prior to, and then explaining it to them that it's just if the students have to go to the main clinic, they can get treatment. In Madison County, even if they can't pay for the treatment, they still figure it out so that everyone is getting treated. Schools, as I said, have a lot of funding from COVID relief funds. So maybe they're just struggling to fill slots. But if they are just struggling to fill slots, there is still a lot they can do to fill those slots by working with outside programs or outside agencies or whatever. At Shelby High School in Ohio, the school partnered with a local agency to send counselors to schools. With screenings, the school identifies students at risk and has them meet with the counselor weekly. Back in Battle High School, did I talk about Battle High School already? When the fuck did I talk about Battle? Oh, I did talk about Battle. Back in Battle High School, the school district partners with Bureau Behavior Health, a mental health center. Bureau then provides case management, therapy, group services, and training to kids about mental health and mental health awareness. Battle also has a partnership with Compass Health Network, resulting in another therapist who comes in once a week. For many students, they have struggled to get mental health services for a variety of reasons. It could be insurance, it could be a wait list, it could be transportation is inconsistent. Whatever the case services, they've struggled with that in the past, and so to have it at school, they are extremely grateful. Everyone is working together to support our students. Then, going back to Puck Charter Schools, they have that graduate intern program, and so in addition to providing counseling for teachers, it also provides counseling for students. At the Alamance Burlington School System in North Carolina, with just an additional $150,000 in funding, school officials say they will be able to team up with 3 mental health agencies in the area to provide a range of mental health services, including therapy. Even the San Luis Obispo County in California, where a grand jury chose to investigate themselves to see how well they were doing, they're providing mental health services, but they found that while they're already providing a lot of great stuff, they have vowed to do better. They've already established wellness centers, full staff counselors, implemented an anonymous reporting system for bullying, and have regular staff training on mental health. But they're planning to potentially expand mental health courses and substance abuse programs, expand training for staff, and help other local schools to get grants for wellness centers. There are also small things as well which have helped the mental health of students. Like more, I guess, kind of more practical, but like, I don't know, whatever. Different aspect of practical. Students from Attleboro High School in Massachusetts are pushing for the passage of a bill before the state legislature that would allow absences due to mental health problems. This has already been something which has been proven to potentially be useful and is something other schools have. Cumberland Valley School District in Pennsylvania, even though they're like a top-rated district by mental health in the area, they're weighing the merits of class ranking, as it's been proven to be a source of anxiety in students. We're going to have some real conversations with our community. Really, what is the purpose of school? Is it to rank and sort kids, or to make sure all kids are learning? Those are 2 separate functions. Upper Darby High Schools in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania have shifted their schedules to start at 9:45 a.m. Technically, the school still starts at 7:30, but students can use the time as they see fit, like they can be home still, or they could go in early to meet with a teacher. This has also benefited a lot of other things like the teacher shortage, as teachers have more flexible time in their day. Frankly, something needs to be done. Some of these improvements need to be implemented, or else the future is just fucked, to put it plainly. With all that being said, how can you, as the viewer, help? How can you help enact good? Well, by being informed, like watching this video. Hi, it's me. That's a good first step. What's also important is holding elected officials accountable and holding them to their promises of making the lives of teachers and the lives of students better. A lot of this is like school board meetings. Just go to school board meetings. Go to school board meetings. Maybe read up beforehand, but go to a school board meeting, because there'll be a lot of crazies that go to school board meetings, and no one else is really there to say, "Hey, I'm not crazy." And I think that crazy is wrong. After all, the students and the youth is the future of not just America, but the whole world. So, yeah. I mean, TLDR, just be like politically active and support efforts to support schools and support things local and close to you that you can support. Wait, why isn't the video over? So, speaking of holding school administrators accountable, that brings me to, I don't know where it'll be. I'll say it's over here. My own school district from my K through 12 experience. As I mentioned in the gossip account video, my school district has done an irresponsibly little amount in terms of fixing the problems of gossip accounts. But as I researched it more and more, I found that my school district has done an irresponsibly little amount in terms of fixing the problem of teen mental health as a whole. And I have proof. A lot of proof. Also, due to going to the school district for 13 years, and from having worked relatively close with a lot of high school administration in the last few years, I know about a plethora of things that my school district has done which have been detrimental for the mental health of kids for no logical reason, like at all. And that's not even me exaggerating, just like no reason. I've also done some research, and found that my school district has done some, let's say, unusual and strange things in regards to their budgets and how they're spending money that's allocated for mental health. It's like a little bit weird where that money's going. Not very clear. But this is already quite long. So that'll be a different video. I know this has been split up into multiple videos, but the plan from the start, no, not from the start. I don't know. It's really gonna be its own thing. I'm splitting it off into its own video, but that'll come out soon. Here's when it's gonna come out. Probably like a week from when this video comes out, but we'll see. The follow-up of me specifically investigating my school district and their sketchy behavior and dealings will come out then. So maybe be excited? Okay, hey, I'm recording this like really soon, comparatively speaking to everything else. It is, it's Wednesday. I mean, it's after midnight, but like, it's like very soon to when this is gonna come out. Anyway, I mean, you made it through the video. So congrats. I do want to thank for the support on the first two, which have come out so far. Oh, the reason I'm here though is that like, yes, so that one's gonna come out, I don't know, TBD. I think May, we'll see. Hopefully May-ish. But I realized that like I haven't updated you on a lot of other things which have gone on that I was planning on doing in here. So like, for one, I made a second channel. It's for fun stuff. This is going to be the serious channel now. That will be the fun stuff channel. The channel's Jake Stalvey Live. There's some fun stuff on there already. Feel free to go check it out. I'll be hopefully posting on that more over the next few months because I need to take a break from serious things for a bit. But so yeah, so check that out. I've also been streaming on Twitch relatively consistently. Jake Stalvey, but yeah, streaming relatively consistently, somewhat frequently. Come in, check that out. And then I also started a podcast with my friend Javi, and those are weekly uploads. That is Not Your Average Losers, if you want to go check that out. But yeah, just that's it.